Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I've been shooting landscapes at night for a long time. I like the stillness after sundown when the roads and trails empty out and the sky turns into an inky backdrop. There's a kind of calm that comes with darkness, and I've always felt comfortable being alone out there with my tripod and my camera. That calm started fading about 3 months ago. It began when I noticed strange shapes in my photos, dark smears that looked vaguely human. At first I thought it was an issue with the camera sensor or something stuck on the lens, but that explanation never held up. I cleaned everything thoroughly. I changed cameras. I used different lenses. Those shapes were still there, and they only ever showed up when I was by myself in remote places. I remember the first time I realized something was seriously wrong. I was standing on a ridge overlooking a small valley. The sky was clear, so I set a long exposure to capture the stars and a bit of the tree line. I was alone, hours away from the nearest town. The wind was light and the only sounds came from distant insects and leaves rustling against each other. Everything felt normal, so I didn't feel any immediate fear. After taking a series of shots, I checked the display. That's when I saw a shape that looked like a silhouette standing just at the edge of the frame near a line of trees. It didn't look like a person walking by. It looked static, like a dark figure frozen in place. I felt my chest tighten and I glanced up from the camera to see if anyone was there. There wasn't. I stood still, scanning the area with my flashlight, but I saw nothing unusual. I shrugged it off as a glitch. I thought maybe my camera picked up a shadow from a branch or a weird artifact from the long exposure. But a week later I went out again. This time I was shooting an old abandoned barn. It was just off a dirt road in the middle of nowhere with no lights for miles. I set up around midnight. The barn looked eerie in the darkness, and I aimed to capture the texture of the wooden boards under the moonlight. I took a few shots in different angles, adjusting the tripod height and shutter speed. Then, while reviewing a test shot, I saw a dark outline near the side of the barn. It looked like a person standing with their back turned toward me. My heart jumped and I lowered the camera. I looked around in every direction, shining my flashlight at the barn's walls, the grass, even the fence line. Nothing. When I looked back at the camera's display, the shape was there. In the photo it was tall and somewhat distorted. It almost looked like it was turning its head toward me, but it didn't have any facial features I could make out. It was just a twisted shadow. I thought about leaving immediately, but I decided to shoot a little more just to see if it would appear again. My hands were shaky and my breathing was off. I remember the feeling in my stomach, a heavy knot that wouldn't go away every time I took a new photo. I checked it right away. Sometimes the shape was there, sometimes it wasn't, but I never saw it with my naked eye, only through the camera. Eventually I packed up and drove away, trying not to speed on the dark road back to town. At home I opened the files on my computer. I zoomed in on those silhouettes in a couple of images. The shape looked like it had a face, but it was warped, like it was smeared across the photo. It had eye-like hollows and a hint of a mouth, but they were in the wrong positions, like someone had dragged them across the image with a cursor. I checked the metadata. Nothing was wrong with the files. They just had these shadows in them that defied explanation. My hands got clammy and I felt nauseous looking at them. I tried to think logically. Maybe there was some interference with my sensor or an odd reflection, but deep down I knew it felt different than a mechanical glitch. I tried ignoring it for a while. I took daytime photos and worked on editing my backlog of images from the last few months. Nothing odd showed up. in any daytime shots, only the nighttime ones, and only in remote places. After a while I decided to test this again, but closer to civilization. I went to a spot near the city, a small park with street lights nearby. I took a few pictures of the night sky and everything looked fine, no silhouettes, no shadows. It seemed like whatever was happening only appeared when I was in more isolated areas. As I convinced myself it might be related to some external interference specific to those spots. Then I went to the coast for a weekend trip. I camped near a rocky beach known for its beautiful night skies. There's almost no light pollution there, and the waves crash against the rocks in a steady rhythm that usually helps me relax. On the second night I set up my tripod on the shore. I could hear the ocean. I tasted the salt in the air. The moon was bright enough to illuminate the surf. I clicked a few shots and checked them. In one of the images I saw another figure on the far right side near a cluster of rocks. It was pitch black against the moonlit coastline, and it looked like a person leaning forward. The shape was pointed in my direction. My heart pounded. I looked up, sweeping my flashlight over the rocks, but only saw the ocean spray and wet stone. No one was there. I tried to keep shooting, but I felt a presence, like something was standing behind me watching. I spun around a few times, shining my light into the darkness. I kept expecting to see someone step out of the shadows, but I was totally alone. After about half an hour of that, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed up my camera gear and hurried back to my tent. Inside, I zipped myself in and tried to calm down. I listened for footsteps or voices, but I just heard the wind and the waves. I barely slept that night. Every small noise made me jolt awake. In the morning I transferred the photos to my laptop. The silhouettes were there in 4 images. They looked slightly different each time, as if moving or shifting. The details were bizarre. One image showed what looked like arms hanging at odd angles. In another, the head shape was tilted and it seemed to have a grin, but it was blurry and contorted. Looking at it made my skin crawl. My chest felt tight and I started sweating even though it wasn't hot. I closed the laptop and went outside. I sat in my camping chair just staring at the ocean, trying to clear my head. I felt an urge to leave immediately, but I forced myself to stay until the end of the day. By evening I had packed up and driven off, promising never to camp there alone again. Back home I got more paranoid. I kept checking behind me. When I walked to my car at night, I found myself scanning every room when I got in, making sure no one was there. My sleep was restless and I'd wake up in a cold sweat thinking I heard a creak in the hallway. My photography suffered. I avoided night shoots, booking only daytime sessions or portrait gigs in well-lit areas, but something in me needed answers. I had to figure out if I was losing my mind or if something really was showing up in my pictures. So 2 weeks ago I planned a trip to a secluded mountain area I'd visited before. The place had a clear night sky and tall pines that framed the stars nicely. I decided I would go alone just to see if these shapes would appear again. Part of me wanted them to show up, part of me hoped it was all in my head. I arrived around 11 p.m. The night was cold and the air felt dry against my face. I found a flat spot off a dirt road and parked. There was a faint glow in the west where the moon was setting. I set up my tripod, put on a wide-angle lens and started shooting. My breath was visible in the beam of my flashlight. I heard an owl somewhere in the trees, maybe 50 yards away. The entire area was silent except for occasional rustling sounds in the underbrush. I tried to focus on the technical side of my work, adjusting aperture, checking the histogram, making sure my exposure was right. Then after the 10th or 12th shot I checked my camera's display. There it was, a shape near a tree trunk. It had a vaguely human form, but I could see what looked like a shoulder twisted inward. My heart rate spiked. I looked around, shining my flashlight on every tree, trying to see if anyone was there. Nothing. The forest looked empty, but I felt like I wasn't alone. I felt a pressure in my chest, like I couldn't take a full breath. My palms were slick with sweat, and I almost dropped my flashlight. I took another shot, faster this time, just to see if I could catch any movement. I checked the display. The shape was closer, maybe a few feet forward. It still looked like a dark mass with some vaguely human features, but the face was wrong, like the eyes were set too wide or the mouth was too large. My stomach churned, and I felt that metallic taste in my mouth that comes with adrenaline. I thought about leaving right away, but I wanted one more shot to confirm it wasn't a trick of the light. I raised the camera and my finger hovered over the shutter. I froze when I sensed movement to my left. A branch snapped. I spun around, flashlight aiming at the tree line. I didn't see anyone, but my heart pounded so hard I felt dizzy. My breathing was fast and my arms trembled. I gripped my camera tight, took one more shot, and then checked the display. This time the silhouette was right in the center of the frame, as if it had jumped in front of the lens. It was just a black shape, but I could see something like a distorted face staring back. I gasped and almost dropped the camera. I immediately folded the tripod, shoved everything into my bag, and SPR'd to my car. The drive home was tense. Every time my headlights hit a passing tree or rock, I expected to see something lurking at the side of the road. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I just kept glancing in the rearview mirror, feeling like something was in the back seat. I finally got home just before dawn. I felt relief when I locked my door behind me, but it didn't last. As soon as I turned off the car engine, I felt like I was being watched through the windows. I ran inside, locked every door, and turned on every light. I loaded the photos onto my computer and forced myself to look at them. My hand shook and my stomach was queasy. The silhouettes were in 5 or 6 shots. One of them clearly showed what looked like a face. The eyes were dark holes, but they were placed too far apart, and the mouth looked like a wide black line. It was blurry, but I could make out enough to feel real fear. I kept thinking that something had followed me home, that it was just outside my window. I paced around, checking the blinds. I turned off all the lights except a small lamp in my living room because I was paranoid about being seen. I couldn't sit still. My heart wouldn't stop racing. That was about a week ago. I haven't gone out to shoot at night since. I've been jumping at every little noise. I sometimes wake up thinking I heard footsteps on my porch. When I open the door to check, there's nothing there. I upgraded my home security system and installed cameras around my property. I check the footage every morning. So far it hasn't shown anything unusual, but I can't shake the feeling that it's only a matter of time. I don't have any friends who believe me. The ones who know about the photos keep insisting it's a camera defect or some trick of the environment. They don't realize the camera and lens are just tools. This thing shows up wherever I go at night, no matter what gear I use. I've started to wonder if it appears because I'm alone or if it's actually following me from place to place. The worst part is that I see it in the photos, but I can't see it with my eyes. That alone makes me question my sanity. Still, the evidence is there in the raw files. I've shown them to a couple of people and they just say it's creepy but must have a natural explanation. I've emailed them to a camera repair specialist who said he couldn't find any issues with my equipment. That's all I needed to hear to confirm it's not just a technical glitch. Now I'm sitting here typing this out, my gear sitting in a corner of my living room. I haven't touched it in days. I'm almost afraid to. Every time I feel the itch to go out and take more pictures. I remember those black shapes staring back at me. I remember the way my gut twisted when I saw them. I think about that last trip, how sure I was that something was in the forest even though I couldn't see it with my flashlight, and I think about how it seems to get closer in the photos, like it's drawing near. I'm not sure what my next move is. Part of me wants to drive out somewhere remote, set up a camera and see if it appears again. Another part of me never wants to shoot at night again. I feel torn because photography has been my life for years, and now it's become this terrifying gamble. When I stand in a dark spot, I feel like I'm inviting something to step into my frame. So for now, I'm taking a break. I'm avoiding lonely roads and isolated trails. I'm staying in well-lit areas whenever I can, but I'm not sure if it'll help. I can't shake the sensation that this thing is still out there just waiting. I glance at the windows whenever I pass them. I keep the curtains drawn at night. My phone is always in my hand or in my pocket, set to record video at a moment's notice, yet every time I press the shutter in low light, I can't ignore the thought maybe it's standing right behind me again. I wish I had a clear conclusion. I wish I could say I discovered a logical reason for all of this, but I haven't. All I have are these photos and the memory of that presence in the dark, the one I couldn't see except through my camera, and every time I look at those files I feel the same cold dread creeping up my spine, reminding me that some things don't want to be explained, they just want to be seen. I noticed him for the first time on a Tuesday afternoon. I was wiping the glass on my living room window, and I glanced at the reflection without thinking. That was when I saw a man standing in my neighbor's yard staring straight at me. At first I froze. He didn't move, he didn't blink, he was just there looking at me with a blank face. I dropped the cloth and turned around to see if anyone was really there. The yard was empty, no one was outside. My neighbor's place was quiet. I heard no voices, no doors opening, nothing. I looked back at the glass to see if maybe I'd imagined it. He was still there in the reflection, same face, same empty stare. That's how it all started. I live alone in a small house on a quiet street. This neighborhood isn't lively. Most people here keep to themselves, and I usually don't see many of them unless I happen to step outside in the morning or late afternoon. I work from home most days, so I'm here a lot, but I rarely have unexpected visitors. It's been a calm environment for years. I've never felt unsafe or uneasy. That changed the day I saw that reflection. I pulled my hand away from the glass and felt the hair on my arm stand up. My pulse quickened, and I took a slow breath to steady myself. I looked over my shoulder again at my neighbor's yard, still empty, but in the glass he was there. I couldn't see him clearly, but I could see a shape, a man in dark clothing standing near the fence line. No expression, just locked eyes with me. My stomach tightened, and I couldn't explain why. After a few seconds I stepped back from the window. My heart was pounding hard and my palms felt sweaty. I stood in the middle of my living room staring at that window, waiting to see if the man would appear on the other side of the glass. For real, he never did. I walked closer and peered out. There was nothing. When I shifted my eyes toward the reflection again, he was gone. I figured I must have been stressed or maybe seeing shadows. I forced myself to shrug it off, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Later that evening I decided to clean the mirror in my hallway. It's an old mirror, not too big, but it hangs near the coat rack. I sprayed some cleaner on the glass and started wiping it with a paper towel. I saw my reflection clearly, and behind me I saw part of the living room and a bit of the window. As I moved the towel in a circle, I paused. My reflection looked fine, but I thought I saw a dark figure in the background of the hallway. I spun around fast. The hallway was empty. I faced the mirror again. At first I didn't see anything, then from the corner of the reflection I saw him again. He was standing somewhere behind me, but there was no One in the hall. I felt my chest clench, my legs got tense, my breath caught in my throat. I took 3 steps back until I was pressed against the hallway wall. I couldn't see him directly, but the mirror showed him. His face had no real expression, just that same hollow stare directed at me. I set the cleaner down and tried to calm my breathing. My mind was racing. Was I hallucinating? Was there some trick with the lighting in my house? I looked over my shoulder, searching for some shape or object that might create a shadow. Nothing stood out. The overhead light was on, and it was bright enough that I could see everything. The man in the reflection didn't move or fade. He was still there, watching. I felt a shiver go through my shoulders. My arms tingled with cold. I wiped my forehead, which felt a little sweaty, and took a cautious step toward the mirror. He looked close in the reflection, but when I glanced behind me, I saw only empty hallway. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to look for a reasonable explanation, maybe some neighbors' silhouette was getting caught in the glass, but this reflection was too distinct. It looked like an actual person with short hair, dark eyes, and a black jacket. He seemed average in height, normal build, no remarkable features except that emptiness on his face. After a few seconds, I walked away from the mirror and went straight to the kitchen. I had this twisting sensation in my gut, and I felt a lump in my throat. I poured myself a glass of water. My hand was trembling so much that I almost spilled it on the counter. I leaned against the sink and closed my eyes for a moment, trying to collect myself. At night I didn't sleep well. I kept picturing that man's face whenever I shut my eyes around midnight. I got out of bed and went to the bathroom. The mirror above the sink felt like a threat. I hesitated before looking at it. I flicked on the light and forced myself to stare into my own reflection. I searched for any sign of him. Nothing. The reflection showed only me, my messy hair, and the toothbrush on the sink. I exhaled in relief. Then, as I turned off the light, I had this urge to look one more time. In the darkness, the mirror was harder to see, but for a split second I thought I caught sight of 2 eyes behind me. I fumbled for the light switch. By the time the light came on again, the space behind me was clear. In the morning, I woke up feeling tense and a bit shaky. I tried to follow my usual routine. I had coffee, checked my emails, and planned my work tasks, but my mind kept wandering to that reflection. I wanted to know if there was some kind of explanation. A couple of times I thought about going next door to see if maybe my neighbor had someone staying over, but I felt uneasy about bringing it up. What would I even say? I keep seeing a man in your yard through my windows and mirrors, but he's never actually there. That sounded ridiculous. Throughout the day I avoided my own mirrors. I also kept the blinds down on most windows. I didn't want to see him again, but I also couldn't help feeling that I needed to check. I caught myself sneaking looks at the windows every time I saw only my reflection. No sign of him. Around noon I had to use the bathroom again. I was so anxious that my stomach hurt. I tried not to glance at the mirror, but I couldn't resist. For a second I thought I saw a flicker of movement behind me. I whipped around, knocking over a small bottle of soap. The bathroom was empty. My heart hammered in my chest. I spent the rest of the afternoon working on my computer. Around 4 I went to the living room for a break. I decided to open the curtains just a little. The sun was going down and the yard outside looked normal. The neighbor's fence, a few bushes, nothing unusual. I tried to see if there was a vantage point that made sense for someone to stand there. The area was open, so I would notice if a man was hanging around, but there was no one. I felt a mixture of relief and confusion. Then I glanced at the reflection on my TV screen. He was there in that reflection, standing right next to the fence. I flinched so hard I nearly fell backward onto the couch. I spun around and saw nothing out the window but in the dark surface of my TV. That man stood in the neighbor's yard gazing at me. His eyes didn't glow or anything like that. They just looked fixed on me. My breathing got sharp and my shoulders felt stiff. I stared at the TV screen for what felt like a long time, maybe a minute, maybe more. He didn't move. He was motionless. I reached for the remote and turned the TV on, hoping to chase away his reflection with some channel or background noise. As soon as the TV lit up, the reflection disappeared. I was left with some random commercial playing, but I felt my legs shaking. I sat on the couch and held my head in my hands. My skin was clammy and my shirt felt damp around my chest. My phone buzzed with a message from a friend. It was a mundane text about weekend plans, but I was too distracted to answer right away. All I could think about was how this figure kept appearing in reflections, but never in real life. I wondered if I was losing it, but I'd never had this kind of experience before. I tried to consider if it was stress, but I hadn't been under major pressure lately. My job was stable and my life was pretty routine, yet something about that man's face kept haunting me. That evening I couldn't bring myself to cook. I ordered takeout and ate in the kitchen with the lights on. I kept the blinds down. I focused on my food, trying not to look at any reflective surfaces. Even the stainless steel toaster was making me nervous, because I could see a faint reflection in its side. When I finished, I washed my plate and listened for any sounds outside. Nothing. I checked my doors to make sure they were locked. The house felt too quiet. My heart was pounding, even though I tried to calm down by reminding myself that I was safe inside. I sat at my desk with my computer turned off, just staring at the dark monitor, trying to gather the courage to see if he'd show up there too. After a few minutes I turned it on and tried to focus on a simple task. I scrolled through random websites, checking the news, looking at some sports updates, just normal stuff. My eyes darted to the corners of the screen, looking for signs of him. I didn't see anything right away. Eventually I relaxed a bit. Around 10 at night I decided to get ready for bed. I walked down the hallway, feeling the floor creak under my feet. I saw the mirror near the coat rack. I paused, unsure if I should try to cover it or ignore it. Curiosity got to me. I stepped in front of it and looked straight into the glass. I saw myself, tired eyes, slightly hunched shoulders. I glanced behind me. In the reflection, the hallway light revealed the path to the living room. No one was there. I sighed in relief, but my body still felt tense. I reached out and touched the mirror's frame. Then behind me in that reflection I saw a flicker of movement. He was stepping into view from a corner I couldn't see in real life. I whirled around. The hallway was empty. The only sound was my ragged breathing. I felt sweat trickling down my forehead. My arms were shaking so much I had to hold them against my sides. The reflection showed him standing closer now, maybe a few feet behind me in that mirrored world. His face was still blank, but it felt more intense. My stomach knotted. I wanted to confront him, but there was nothing in the real hallway. My mouth went dry and my pulse pounded in my ears. I backed away from the mirror, keeping my eyes on it. I kept expecting him to vanish, but he stayed there in the reflection, motionless. The second I left the mirror's frame, I heard a soft click like the house settling. My heart jumped. I turned out the hallway light and rushed to my bedroom, shutting the door behind me. I didn't sleep much. I kept the bedroom lamp on. Every little sound made me sit up and listen. I thought about calling someone to stay with me, maybe a friend or a relative, but I felt embarrassed explaining why. Also, a part of me worried that talking about it might make it worse. I kept checking the small mirror above my dresser to see if he was there, but I saw only my reflection. After a while I lay down, stared at the ceiling, and tried to push away the thoughts. In the morning I felt exhausted. My eyes were heavy and my head throbbed. The day dragged on. I moved from room to room, avoiding Windows and mirrors, I kept seeing him in my peripheral vision whenever I glanced at shiny surfaces or faint reflections on my phone screen. My entire body felt on edge, my chest felt tight, my hands were shaky, my throat felt dry, and I drank water non-stop, but the tension didn't go away. I finally decided to do something. I walked outside around my neighbor's yard. Nobody was there. The grass was normal, the fence was intact, and the back door was locked. I peeked through the fence boards and saw my own yard. I didn't see anyone lurking, no signs of footprints or anything else that would explain a person standing around. I felt a mix of relief and frustration. On the one hand, I wanted to find some logical clue. On the other, I was glad there wasn't a real intruder, but the fact that he only appeared in reflections kept gnawing at me. I stood in my yard for a few minutes, letting the sunlight hit my face, trying to ground myself in reality. The sun felt warm, and the breeze carried the scent of cut grass from somewhere nearby. I could hear a distant car passing and nothing else. It was all normal. When I came back inside, I found myself drawn to the mirror in the hallway again. My chest felt tight with dread, but I stepped in front of it. He was there, immediately, closer than ever in the reflection, standing right behind me. I felt this jolt in my stomach and stumbled backward, pressing my shoulder against the hallway wall. I tried to speak, but my throat locked up in the glass. I saw him tilt his head slightly, like he was registering my movement, but not reacting with any real emotion. I heard my heartbeat pounding in my ears. My vision narrowed. My hands felt numb. I backed away until I reached the living room, keeping my gaze locked on the mirror. Once I broke the line of sight, I could breathe again. My lungs burned and I let out a shaky exhale. Now I can't say I've figured out a solution. I don't know what or who he is. I haven't told anyone. I've just been living in this tense routine, avoiding reflective surfaces when I can. But the problem is that reflections are everywhere. Even a small glass panel can bring him into view. It's like he exists only in that reflected world, waiting and watching. I don't want to invite him in, and I don't want to provoke him. I keep telling myself to leave it alone. Something in my gut says this isn't safe to explore. Every time I see him, my entire body goes on high alert. My stomach churns and my mind screams at me to look away, but it's getting harder to ignore. He feels closer each time, like he's testing the boundaries of the mirror. I'm stuck with the possibility that he's real in some way I don't understand. He hasn't come through yet, but I worry that someday he might. For now, I live with my curtains drawn and my mirrors covered. I move around my house with caution, trying to avoid catching a glimpse of him in the surfaces I can't fully hide. I feel a constant weight in my chest. When I finally fall asleep at night, I have nightmares of seeing him right behind me when I open my eyes, but I keep telling myself I'm safer if I don't look too close. That's the only thing I can do, because every time I see him, my body floods with dread, and I get this urgent feeling that I should not investigate. I hold on to that instinct. I don't know what would happen if he crossed over. I just know I'm not ready to find out. I never wanted an old painting in my house, but that changed the day my distant uncle sent me a package without warning. Inside there was a portrait of a man dressed in old-fashioned clothes. He had a stern face, a high collar, and a narrow nose. His hair was dark and short, brushed back from his forehead. Something about his gaze made me pause. His eyes looked like they were pinned on me, almost as if they were watching me open the crate. I felt my hand shake a little when I lifted the portrait out of the box. I could have thrown it out right there, but I told myself it was just an antique. I figured it might be worth something someday, or maybe it was already valuable. That's how I ended up hanging it on the wall in my home office. The day I put it up, I spent a long time making sure it was level, the paint on the canvas looked cracked and a bit faded, but it still held a certain intensity. The background was dark with a faint outline of a chair behind the man. His suit was from some older century. I'm not good with historical periods, but it looked like something from at least 200 years ago. The frame was heavy wood carved in small patterns around the edges. It smelled musty, like an old attic that hasn't been opened in decades. I stepped back and looked at the painting. The man's eyes appeared focused on me, and I got a chill on the back of my neck. His expression was blank, like he was hiding something. I brushed that thought aside. It was just a painting. I switched off the light and left the office for the day. Next morning I walked in with a coffee in hand. I noticed the man's eyes right away. When I moved from one side of the room to the other, they seemed to follow me. At first I laughed to myself. Lots of portraits have that effect, but then I realized something felt off. There was this feeling that the man was actually looking at me, not just painted to appear that way. I stood in the center of the office and stared at him. My chest felt tight, my gut tensed. I reminded myself to breathe. Eventually I turned around and tried to focus on my computer. I had work to do. By midday I started smelling something faint but unpleasant. It was a stale odor that reminded me of damp clothes forgotten in a closet. I thought maybe I had spilled coffee or left some food to rot. I checked the trash can under my desk, but it was empty. Then I noticed the smell got stronger. When I turned toward the painting, my nose wrinkled in disgust. It was like stepping into an old basement. I opened a window to let in fresh air. That seemed to help a bit. Later that afternoon, while I was on a conference call, I glanced at the painting. My heart skipped a beat. For a split second I thought the man's lips were curved in a thin smile. I blinked hard and stared. His mouth seemed normal again, straight, stern, and unmoving. A bead of sweat rolled down my temple. My coworkers on the call asked if I was okay. I just mumbled something about the heat in my house. Once the call ended, I closed my laptop and walked over to the painting. I leaned in nose close. The smell hit me again, stronger this time. My eyes watered and I recoiled, coughing. When I regained my breath, I just stared at those eyes. They were dark brown, but under certain light they looked almost black. I felt like he was silently daring me to keep looking. I told myself I was just imagining things. Then I left the office. Over the next few days my routine stayed more or less the same. I'd enter the office in the morning, notice that smell, and see those eyes follow me. My stomach churned every time I looked at it. I felt a weird tension in my arms and chest, like I was bracing for a fight. I tried to ignore the painting, but it was impossible. Every time I turned around, my gaze drifted back to it. The rest of my house felt fine. The living room was bright and the kitchen smelled normal, but in my office the air felt heavy. My face would get hot and my scalp would prickle with sweat. One night around midnight I woke up thirsty and decided to grab a glass of water. I walked down the hallway past my office door. I usually keep that door closed, but for some reason it was open a crack. I felt a wave of unease as I noticed a slice of darkness inside. I pushed the door open with my foot and turned on the light. The painting was still on the wall, but it seemed off-center, like it wasn't hanging straight. I frowned. I remembered leveling it with care the day I put it up. My skin broke out in goosebumps. I stepped closer and saw fresh scuff marks on the wall near the frame, like it had been shifted. I checked the back of the frame and the wire hanger. Everything was intact, but the painting had definitely moved. My hand shook as I straightened it. I didn't see any footprints or anything else unusual, but the smell of mold or mildew was thicker than ever. It almost burned my nose. My heart pounded so hard that I could feel my pulse in my neck. I left the office without turning off the light. The next morning I felt exhausted. My eyes were bloodshot and my back ached from tossing and Turning, I forced myself to return to the office, hoping I could ignore that uneasy feeling. The painting was still there, slightly angled again. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I decided to check behind it again. I removed it from the wall and placed it on the floor. The back of the canvas had a patch of dark discoloration, like mold had started to grow. My eyes watered from the stench, and I set the painting down, covering my mouth with my sleeve. I wiped the sweat from my forehead. I wanted to throw that thing in the trash, but I also felt a strange pull to keep it. It was a family heirloom, wasn't it? Maybe my uncle had a reason for sending it to me. I propped it back on the wall and pushed it flat against the hooks. For a moment I studied the painted man's expression. It looked a bit more hostile than before. His brow seemed furrowed, his eyes looked more intense. My throat tightened and I felt a surge of adrenaline. I stepped back and turned away, refusing to stare any longer. That evening I invited a close friend over, thinking maybe a second set of eyes would help me see things rationally. I didn't tell him everything. I just said I had an old painting I wanted him to take a look at. When he arrived, I led him to the office. The painting was right there. I watched his reaction. He just shrugged and said it looked like a regular antique. I asked if he noticed anything strange about the eyes. He said they were painted in a way that gave that illusion of following you, which he'd seen in some museums. He also noted the smell. He suggested maybe there was mold in the frame. I felt a slight relief. At least I wasn't totally imagining the odor. But then as we stood there talking, I saw him shift uncomfortably. He cleared his throat. He said something felt off about the painting, but he couldn't pinpoint what. He kept glancing at it as if expecting it to do something. He finally said, "It's creepy," and that was all he could manage. I noticed his hands were shaking as he shoved them into his pockets. He left sooner than I expected. He didn't even want to stay for dinner later that night. I sat in front of my computer trying to catch up on emails. The stench grew until I felt like I was in a damp cave. My head throbbed, my eyes stung. I stood up and went to open the window wider. Then I heard a faint scraping sound. It was a light scratch, like wood brushing against drywall. I froze. I turned around and the painting looked like it was tilted again, just a tiny bit. The overhead light flickered and a wave of cold air hit me. My arms broke out in goosebumps. I reached for the door knob, but I stopped. I turned back to the painting. I realized the man's lips were parted, almost as if he was breathing. My legs felt weak, my forehead burned, and my mouth went dry. I forced myself to step closer. When I was a foot away, I saw a trace of moisture on the painted lips, like condensation. My stomach lurched and I stumbled backward. I sprinted out of the office and shut the door behind me. I spent the night on the couch in the living room. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that portrait moving around in the darkness, stepping off the wall and wandering around the house. I imagined those wet lips and those eyes following me. If I dared to get a glass of water, my body felt worn out. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I decided I'd had enough. I grabbed a flashlight and some gloves. My plan was to take the painting off the wall, carry it to the garage, and maybe wrap it in plastic until I could figure out what to do with it. When I swung the office door open, I gasped. The painting wasn't on the wall. I scanned the room. My breath caught in my chest. It was sitting on the floor, leaning against my desk. The smell was so strong that my eyes watered. It felt like someone had rubbed mold into my nose. My heart hammered. I clenched my fists. My scalp tingled. I looked around for any sign of forced entry or something that could have knocked it down. Nothing. The window was locked. The door had been closed. No sign of an intruder. I approached the painting, breathing through my mouth. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The face looked even more twisted now. The man's eyes were narrower and his Lips seemed to curve upward in a sick grin. I felt dizzy, like my body was about to shut down. My stomach clenched and I nearly wretched. I carried the painting to the garage as fast as I could. The entire time I had the sense that I was being watched, like those eyes were aware of everything. My head throbbed and sweat poured down my face. I finally set it against the back wall of the garage and threw an old blanket over it. Then I turned on the overhead light in the garage just to feel safer. I stood there panting, my hands on my knees. I locked the garage door and went back inside the house. For the rest of the day I stayed out of the office. I didn't even open the door. I walked around the house, checking every room, making sure everything was in place. My breathing was shallow. My heart wouldn't stop racing. By nightfall I forced myself to eat a sandwich, but I barely tasted it. My throat felt tight and every noise made me jump. A car passed by outside and I jumped off the couch startled. I cursed under my breath and realized I was a nervous wreck. Around midnight I heard another sound, this time coming from the garage. It was a dull thud, like something had fallen. My mouth went dry. I opened my front door and stepped outside. The night air felt cold on my skin. I circled around to the garage side door. My legs felt heavy. My hands were slick with sweat. I gripped the door knob but hesitated. My heart felt like it was about to leap out of my chest. I took a slow breath and told myself I had to see. I pushed the door open and flicked on the light. The blanket was on the floor. The painting was upright, leaning against a different wall. My mouth hung open. My ears started ringing. I could see fresh scratches on the concrete where it must have slid or been dragged. I felt an intense surge of nausea. My stomach muscles clenched and I fought to keep calm. I took a few steps closer, though my feet felt like lead. The painting was angled toward the door as if it wanted to face me. The man's expression was almost triumphant. His grin looked more pronounced. I felt a tremor in my hands. My lungs expanded and contracted in quick, shallow breaths. My vision blurred at the edges. I backed away, leaving the light on, and slammed the side door shut. I locked it and ran back inside, shutting and locking every door behind me. My heart pounded so hard that I thought I might faint. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I stayed on the couch staring at the dark TV screen, flinching at every tiny sound. The house felt colder than usual and my breath came out shaky. I tried not to think about that portrait. I tried not to imagine it inching closer to the main house, but in the back of my mind I kept picturing it standing in the hallway, that smell of mold enveloping me. My skin crawled, my teeth clenched until my jaw ached. By sunrise I had a plan. I got up, got dressed and went straight to the garage with a hammer and a roll of duct tape. I turned on every light. The painting was still there in the same spot facing the door. I threw the blanket over it again, not wanting to look at those eyes. My chest was tight and my hand shook around the hammer's handle. I lifted the painting, carried it to my car and wedged it into the trunk. The stench filled the air around me, but I fought the urge to vomit. I slammed the trunk shut. Then I stood there panting, my heart in my throat. I didn't care if it was a family relic or a cursed item or just some weird hallucination. I was done with it. I planned to drive it somewhere far away and leave it in a junkyard or a dumpster. I didn't want it near me and I didn't want to donate it or sell it to someone else. That felt wrong. My only thought was to get rid of it once and for all. My head pounded and my arms felt drained, but I had the painting in my trunk and that was enough to make me feel some relief. I got into the driver's seat and stared at my rearview mirror. The morning sun was bright. My eyes stung from lack of sleep. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I took a shaky breath. I could still smell that moldy odor even though the trunk was closed. My mouth tasted bitter and my entire body felt tense, but I was determined to drive away and never look back. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway. I glanced toward my house. The office window was closed, the curtains drawn. I exhaled slowly, my pulse still pounded in my ears. As I drove, I refused to check the rearview mirror again. I refused to think about those eyes that grin or the chance that the painting might move on its own. I just kept driving, gripping the wheel with white knuckles, focusing on the road ahead. I was done with it, and I hoped that once I let it go, I'd finally be free from whatever watched me through those painted eyes. I hate the attic in this building. The first time I went up there, I felt a pressure in my chest. As soon as my head passed the door frame, the dust hung in the air, and I could taste it on my tongue. My eyes burned, and I tried not to cough. The wood creaked under my boots like it might give out any second. I remember checking my flashlight to make sure it had fresh batteries. I didn't trust the overhead bulbs. They flickered on and off sometimes, and I didn't want to be stuck in the dark up there. That was a few months ago, and things have gotten a lot worse since then. I'm the caretaker here. I've been doing this job for a while. The building is old, built a long time ago. Most people avoid the top floors. They say the elevator is unreliable past the 8th floor, and we have too many boxes, old wardrobes, and crates cluttering the attic, so it's my job to go up there and make sure the place doesn't fall apart. I check for leaks. I make sure the floor isn't rotting. I keep an eye on the old wiring. Sometimes I sweep if the dust piles up too much. Nobody likes to join me. The few who've been up there said they felt like something was watching them. One guy told me he heard slow footsteps that stopped whenever he turned around. I used to think it was just the building settling, but I'm not so sure anymore. I noticed the door about 2 weeks ago. I was in a far corner of the attic behind stacks of crates that smelled like moldy sea cardboard. I saw a small corridor that I'd never walked down before. The corridor was narrow and the ceiling was lower there. I almost hit my head on the rafters. I shined my flashlight ahead. I saw the outline of a door at the end. I checked my building map later and found nothing about a door in that spot. The blueprint showed a solid wall. I remember thinking maybe it was a leftover closet or some hidden storage area that never got registered. The door was made of old wood. The paint was chipped. I tried the door knob. It didn't budge. I jiggled it a little harder and it stayed locked. I leaned my shoulder against it to see if it would give. It felt like something pushed back. I assumed some heavy furniture was blocking it on the other side. I went back downstairs and grabbed a small crowbar. I came back up and tried to pry it, but the door refused to open more than a fraction of an inch. I even felt a slight shove in return, like a person was behind it holding it shut. While I was pressing my ear to the door, I heard a long scraping sound like nails dragging across wood. I stepped back. My breath felt stuck in my throat. I listened again, and I heard a strange whimpering noise. It wasn't loud, but it sounded like something was in pain or upset. I got chills on my arms and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I left in a hurry that day because I didn't want to mess with it. I told myself I'd go back later with better tools. That night I couldn't stop thinking about the sound. I paced around my apartment. I tried to watch some TV to distract myself, but my mind kept going back to that door. Eventually, I fell asleep on my couch around 2 in the morning. I woke up with a start. I heard creaking above me. The attic is right above my unit. The footstep-like sounds were slow and rhythmic. It felt like someone was walking back and forth, but I knew nobody had the key to the attic except me. The building manager has a master key, but he never goes up there without telling me. The next morning I Went back to the attic as soon as my shift started. The corridor to the door felt darker than usual. I tried the light switch, but the overhead bulb just flickered and then went out. I used my flashlight. The door looked the same except for fresh scratch marks on the outside. They cut deep into the wood and I could see splinters scattered on the floor. My stomach tightened. It looked like an animal had tried to claw its way out, but I have no idea how an animal that big would have gotten in. I put on some work gloves and tried to pry the door again with my crowbar. The door moved a little, but it still wouldn't open more than half an inch. I shoved my knee against it, trying to force it. The door seemed to push back. I could feel a slow, steady pressure from the other side. I grunted and tried to keep forcing it, but my hand started to sweat, my heart beat pounding in my ears. Finally, I gave up, stepping back and breathing hard. I felt elated and my chest felt tight again. I heard something from inside that sounded like a low moan. I jumped back, nearly dropping my flashlight. Then I realized my arm was trembling. I didn't want to stand there any longer. I returned to the main part of the attic to do my usual checks. The furniture and boxes were covered in dust as always. I ran my hand along a large wooden chest. My fingers came away gray. I saw footprints in the dust that weren't mine. They were large, but it was hard to tell if they were from boots or shoes. They led to the corridor with the locked door. I decided to talk to the building manager about it. I found him in his office downstairs. I told him I'd found a locked door in the attic that wasn't on the map. He looked puzzled. He said maybe it was added during some old renovation. I asked if we had any records or extra keys. He rummaged through a filing cabinet and came up with nothing. He told me not to worry about it unless it was a safety hazard. I told him about the sounds, but he gave me a blank stare. He said it was probably rats or pigeons. He had more pressing matters to handle. I left feeling frustrated. My gut told me it wasn't just rats. I decided to tackle the problem on my own. I bought a new heavy-duty crowbar, a sturdy flashlight, and some gloves with a better grip. That evening I climbed the stairs to the attic. My legs felt stiff, my shoulder muscles were tight. I had a dull pain in my lower back, but I ignored it. When I opened the attic door, I flicked the light switch on. The bulb flickered and dimmed again. I walked past piles of old chairs and dusty couches. I heard a scraping sound near the corner. My heart pounded. I aimed my flashlight and saw a small rat dart behind a chair. I caught my breath. I kept going. When I reached the corridor, it felt colder. I rubbed my arms. The door was there, same as before, but it looked more worn. The scratch marks were deeper. It looked like someone had pounded on it. The wood had small cracks and chips missing. The air smelled stale, like old dirt. I placed my flashlight on a nearby box, shining the beam right at the door. I wedged the new crowbar between the door and the frame. Then I pressed down with all my strength. The wood creaked and the door opened a few inches, enough for me to peer inside. I angled my flashlight through the gap. I saw darkness. A damp smell drifted out. I pushed a bit more and tried to look deeper. I glimpsed a space that seemed bigger than a closet. It looked like another room. Dust floated in the beam of light. I couldn't see the back wall, so I moved my head to try a different angle. That's when I felt something graze my arm through the gap. It was a light touch, but it felt solid. My skin prickled. I jerked back and almost lost my crowbar. I let go of the door and it snapped shut with surprising force. The door knob rattled for a second like something grabbed it from inside. My mouth went dry. I just stood there, my mind blank for a few seconds. I swallowed hard and rubbed my forearm where I felt the touch. I didn't feel any cut or scratch, but I could still sense the pressure, like a hand or a claw had brushed against me. I took a few steps back. My muscles felt ready to bolt. I told myself I had to calm down. I packed up my flashlight and crowbar my hand shook. I turned around and walked away, keeping my eyes on the door until I rounded the corner. I spent the next hour pacing around the attic. I reorganized some boxes, adjusted some tarps, and took a look at the old beams. My mind wouldn't let go of what happened. I kept hearing a muffled knocking sound in the distance. I checked the time and realized my shift would end soon. I was relieved. I locked the attic door behind me and headed downstairs. That night I could hear the floor above me creak again. It sounded heavier, like footsteps crossing the length of the attic. My stomach felt twisted. Over the next few days the tension grew. I had to go up there for routine checks, but I avoided the corridor unless I had no choice. Even then I could feel the air get colder as I approached it. Each time I passed by I heard faint rustling or scraping from behind the door. My chest felt tight and my ears started ringing whenever I stood near that corner for too long. Twice I tried calling out, asking if anyone was in there. I only got silence, followed by soft distant moans that made my scalp tingle. I told myself I should seal the door, maybe hammer some boards over it, but I kept hesitating because I wanted to understand what was in there. I thought about cutting a hole in the door, but the idea of poking my head or a camera inside made my hand sweat. I also considered bringing someone else up for help, but I didn't want to sound crazy. Most of the staff here won't go near the attic anyway. They know it's creepy and they avoid it. One evening I decided to stand outside that door for a few minutes just to listen. My pulse was racing and my forehead was damp. I picked off my flashlight and waited in the dark. At first I heard nothing. Then I caught a quiet scratching sound. It was rhythmic, like someone dragging a fingernail in short bursts. My shoulders tensed, my mouth felt dry. The sound lasted maybe 15 seconds, then stopped. After that I heard a long soft wail. It reminded me of someone trying to speak through a wall or a thick gag. I pressed my ear to the door. I smelled something musty, like wet cloth or dirty hair. My stomach turned and I pulled away. I couldn't stay there anymore that night. I slept in my living room again, far from the attic. The next morning I talked to the manager one last time. He shrugged and told me to stay out of that part of the attic if it freaked me out. He said he'd look for any old construction records, but he wasn't going to spend a lot of time on it. He didn't think it was a threat. I nodded, but I felt a heaviness in my chest. I knew something was off. I could feel it in my bones. Since then I've been hearing the footsteps more often. They start late at night and go on for hours. Sometimes I can't tell if it's one set of footsteps or more. I hear occasional thumps, like something heavy dropped on the floor. When I go up there in the morning I don't see any signs of a break-in. All the boxes and furniture stay in the same place, but the dust patterns shift. I'll see smears or long streaks as if someone dragged a foot or a hand across the floor. It makes my stomach flutter with nerves. Sometimes I freeze in place, waiting for something to lunge out from behind a crate. Nothing does, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I've thought about quitting. I've actually started looking for a different building to work in. Still, I haven't walked away yet. I keep thinking about that door. It's locked and it's not on any blueprint. Something inside is making those sounds, or at least something is pushing the door from the other side. I don't know what it is. I can't find a reasonable explanation. All I know is that it's there and it doesn't want me to open that door all the way. Sometimes I wonder if it's better for me not to know. When I do my rounds now I move quickly. I check the roof access, glance at the pipes, and trying not to look at that corridor. Still, I feel the floor vibrate under my boots. I hear faint scraping. I sense something pacing behind in those walls, and every time the overhead bulb flickers I grip my flashlight in case the light goes out. I don't like the dark up there. It feels too thick, like it's pressing down on me. I haven't heard any voices, I haven't seen anything clear or solid, but I have felt that touch on my arm, I have heard that scratching, and I have smelled that musty odor through the crack in the door. When I'm lying in my bed at night, I feel that pressure above me, like the ceiling might collapse from all the weight of whatever is up there. I don't know if I'll ever figure out what's happening in that locked room, but every time the attic floor creaks and every time that door groans, my heart pounds and I feel the sweat on my skin. I plan to go up again tomorrow. I'll bring my tools, I'll try to pry the door open a little more. I want to see if there's furniture blocking it or if something else is there. I'm not sure if I'm ready. My gut says to leave it alone, but my curiosity is stronger than my fear, at least for now. If I manage to get it open, I'll shine my flashlight inside and see what I can find. But if I feel something touch me again, or if I hear that moaning up close, I might turn around and never come back. Until then, I'll keep my eyes on the ceiling and listen for the slow, steady steps above my head. I just hope whatever is behind that door stays on its side. I never expected to feel uneasy on my own property. I thought this place would be my escape from crowded streets and constant traffic. I drove 3 hours from the city and took a chance on a fixer-upper in the countryside. I wanted open air and calm nights. I wanted more space. I got it, but I also got something else. Ever since I moved in, there's been a voice at night. It calls my name, and it seems to come from the old well on the far end of the property. Now I can't sleep without wondering if I'll hear those whispers again. I arrived on a Friday morning. I stepped out of my truck and stretched my arms. The land around me looked quiet. A few low hills, patches of dry grass, and a small cluster of trees stood off to one side. The house had chipped paint and creaky steps. I could see that it needed some work, but I felt proud. I knew I could handle a few repairs. The barn behind the house leaned a bit, and a few boards on its walls looked rotten. I planned to replace them soon. Beyond the barn, I noticed a stone well. It sat about 20 yards behind the barn with a crumbling circular wall. Someone had laid a piece of old plywood on top. I barely glanced at it that first day. I set my stuff inside the living room. The air felt stale. The floors creaked under my boots. I opened a couple of windows and let fresh air in. I brought in a few pieces of furniture and set my bed up in the only bedroom on the ground floor. That night I ate a sandwich and sipped a beer on the front porch. The sky was full of stars. A soft breeze rustled the grass. I remember thinking, this is exactly what I wanted when I went to bed. Around 11, I fell asleep without trouble. Then sometime after midnight I heard a faint sound. It was low, like a murmur. It made me sit up in bed. My eyes adjusted to the darkness and I stared at the open window. I thought maybe the wind was carrying voices from somewhere else. The night was so quiet I held my breath. The sound came again, a soft hiss that seemed to stretch out and fade. I got out of bed, walked to the window, and looked outside. Nothing stood out. I heard crickets. I saw the outline of the barn in the distance. I saw the shape of that old well. The noise seemed to come from that direction. It was just a guess, but something inside me tightened. I told myself it was my imagination. I crawled back into bed and waited. After a minute or two it stopped. I eventually fell back asleep. The next morning I stepped outside and walked around the property. I wanted to get a closer look at the barn. I checked the walls and the roof. Then I wandered over to the well. The wood covering the top looked weathered and splintered. I removed it and peered inside. The darkness swallowed my view. I leaned in a bit, felt a gust of cold air hit my face and smelled damp stone. I could see water about 15 foot down. There was no bucket or rope. It just looked abandoned. I didn't linger. I replaced the plywood and returned to the house to start on a few chores. Later that day I assembled some shelves in the living room. I hammered nails, measured boards, and organized my tools. At one point I thought I heard a voice again. I paused my work, listened carefully, and realized it might have been the wind through a crack in the wall. I couldn't be sure, but it raised the hairs on my arms. By dusk I was tired. I cooked some eggs, ate quickly, and checked the front door lock. I felt jumpy, but I shrugged it off. That night the whispers got louder. I heard them as soon as I turned out the light. They weren't clear words, but they sounded like my name in a distorted voice. I felt my heart pound. My eyes darted around the room. I switched on the bedside lamp and swallowed hard. The sound faded. I turned the lamp off again. Within a few seconds the murmur started back up. My chest tightened. A chill ran over my back. I got up, walked to the front door, and looked outside. The grass swayed. The barn looked dark. I stood there listening, trying to figure out where the whisper came from. It seemed to circle the house. It sounded like it crawled along the walls. I couldn't pinpoint it, but every time I focused in one direction, the sound shifted to another corner of the yard. Eventually, I closed the door and locked it. I spent the rest of that night pacing the house. I tried to watch a local TV station, but static cut in and out my focus. Every time the voice returned around 3 o'clock in the morning, I pushed the couch against the living room wall, sat down, and dozed off. Out of sheer exhaustion, I woke up with a stiff neck. At sunrise, the house felt stale again, and the whisper was gone. The next day, I drove into town for supplies. I picked up a few thick wooden planks and some nails. I told myself I would seal off the well. I also bought extra locks and more flashlights. I tried to keep myself busy. I told the hardware store clerk about my plan to cover an old well. He just nodded and said something about it being safer that way. I drove back home with an uneasy feeling. That afternoon I carried the planks to the well. The sun beat down on me. I could feel sweat trickling down my face. I lifted the old plywood off the top. A stale cold draft rose from inside. I stared into the darkness for a moment and leaned in to see if anything was down there. My eyes strained and I saw small ripples in the water. Then I heard a faint sigh, like air escaping from a small gap. It made me step back. I tried not to think about it. I nailed the new planks across the opening, covering it completely. I hammered until I was sure the wood wouldn't shift. Then I walked around the well and placed a few rocks against the edges, hoping that would keep everything in place. That evening the wind picked up. I heard it whistle against the house. The sky grew cloudy and the air felt heavy. I could smell the possibility of rain. I stood in the kitchen, ate a quick meal, and decided to head to bed early. My legs felt weak and my mind buzzed with anxious thoughts. I kept hearing that whisper in my head. When I lay down, I tried to distract myself by reading a manual on home repairs, but after a few pages I heard it again. It was clearer this time. I recognized my name. It was like a hushed call. I froze. My pulse sped up and I gripped the sheets. I told myself that the well was sealed. No one could be in there. No one else was on the property. It had to be my imagination. I got up, walked to the living room, and turned on every light. That's when I heard soft knocking on the front door. I stood by the couch staring at that door, not sure what to do. Nobody came to visit me out here, especially not this late. The knocking repeated, a few taps, then silence. My heart felt like it would burst out of my chest. I approached the door, flipped on the porch light, and looked through the small window. I saw nothing. I opened the door a crack and peered outside. The yard was empty. The barn was still. The well off in the distance was dark. I slammed the door shut and locked it. My hand shook. For an hour I paced around. I looked out of every window. I checked all the locks. I kept expecting to see someone there looking outside. I finally sat on the edge of my bed, kept the lamp on, and tried to keep my eyes open. Eventually I drifted off. When I woke up, it was dawn. The house was quiet. The boards Over the well stayed in place, but I felt uneasy over the next few days. I tried to ignore the noise. I focused on repairs. I fixed the barn's door hinges. I replaced some rotten boards on the barn side. I spent hours hammering and carrying lumber. I felt the sun burn my neck. I pushed through it, hoping physical work would distract me, but at night the whispers returned. They drifted through the walls. They sounded more urgent. Sometimes they echoed from room to room. Other times they seemed to come from under the floorboards. I couldn't relax. My hands trembled when I tried to hold a fork at dinner. I lost my appetite and started skipping meals. My nights became long stretches of waiting for that voice to stop. It never did. After a week of this, I decided to inspect the well again. Even though I had sealed it, I took a heavy flashlight and some rope, thinking I might lower the light inside. I walked out there in the late afternoon. The sky was grey and the wind rustled the weeds. The boards over the well looked intact. I pried one corner loose with a crowbar, just enough to peek inside. A rush of cool air hit me. My nose picked up a musty smell, kind of like wet stone. I shone the flashlight down. The beam showed water about 15 feet below. The walls were made of old stone, and I didn't see any openings. I heard a small drip echo. The surface of the water rippled as if something had just moved beneath it. I felt my stomach tighten, and I heard a short, sharp breath coming from within. My flashlight flickered. My mouth went dry. I closed the gap, replaced the board, and hammered it back down. My hand shook so hard I almost dropped the hammer. That night the noises became louder. They weren't just whispers, they were raspy, like someone trying to speak through a strained throat. My name came through again and again. The voice seemed to move along the walls of my bedroom. I jumped up, flicked on the light, and grabbed my phone. I checked for a signal. I had one bar. I dialed the local sheriff's office. I got a dispatcher. I asked if anyone had reported strange trespassers in the area. The dispatcher sounded calm. She said she hadn't received any calls like that. She asked if I needed an officer to come by. I told her I wasn't sure. I explained I kept hearing voices, but I couldn't confirm if anyone was on my property. She said she'd send someone the next day to take a look. I hung up and tried to breathe. Morning came and I waited by the front porch. A deputy arrived in a dusty patrol car. He got out, walked up to me, and asked a few questions. I led him around the yard. I showed him the well and explained that I thought I heard voices. He removed his hat and scratched his head. He tapped the boards with the toe of his boot and asked if I ever looked inside at night. I said no. He glanced around, didn't see any footprints or signs of trespassing, and told me it was probably the wind. Then he asked if I wanted him to remove the board so he could check inside. I told him it wasn't necessary. I felt embarrassed. He gave me his card and told me to call if anything changed. Then he drove away. That evening I sat inside and listened. I kept all the lights on. I tried to watch television, but the static got worse. At one point the screen flickered so much I turned it off. The house felt stuffy. The air tasted like dust. When it got dark, the whispers came back. They moved through the hallways, tapped on the walls, and slid under the doors. I heard my name repeated over and over. Each time my heart pounded. My palms got sweaty. My mind raced. I wanted to run outside and drive back to the city, but I didn't want to leave my house. I also felt a strange pull to the well, like I needed to figure out what was inside. Around midnight, I found myself standing at the back door. I had a flashlight and a hammer in my hand. My mouth felt dry. My head pulsed with tension. I opened the door and stepped into the yard. The grass brushed against my ankles. The night air felt cold. I took slow steps toward the barn. I could hear crickets, but the main thing I heard was that whisper, like it was guiding me. I stopped by the barn door, slid it open, and looked inside. The moonlight revealed tools, bales of hay, and shadows. Nothing moved. I stepped back and walked toward the well. The boards over the opening were still nailed down. I moved closer, my breathing shallow. I placed a hand on the boards. They felt damp. My flashlight beam shook as I held it. I heard that faint breath again, like someone exhaling just below the surface. My chest felt tight. My arms trembled. I wanted to pry off the boards and shine my light inside, but I couldn't get myself to do it. I felt a chill run down my spine. The voice grew louder, but it stayed muffled. My name came out in a drawn-out whisper over and over. I stumbled back a step and almost dropped the flashlight. I forced myself to turn around and walk back to the house, my eyes fixed on the ground. The whisper followed me the entire way. When I got inside, I locked every door. I grabbed a few towels and stuffed them at the bottom of the doors, hoping to block out the sound. I could still hear it by 3 in the morning. I was huddled in a corner of the living room with my flashlight light on. My eyes darted around and my muscles felt tense. I tried to calm down by counting my breaths. The whispers never stopped. They slipped through the cracks in the windows, sneaked under the doors, and echoed in the hall. I was sure it was the well and it wanted me to come back, but I didn't want to face it. I was afraid of what I might find. I was afraid of the cold air that kept rushing up from the darkness. I was afraid of the voice that sounded so familiar, like it knew me. I sat there listening to it call my name, and I kept wondering how much longer I could stand it. It started with a sharp ring in the dead of night. I wasn't used to hearing the phone in my apartment, and I almost fell out of bed when it buzzed for the first time. I live by myself and I never give out my landline number. The phone came with the apartment, so I keep it around, but I rarely touch it. That first night when it rang at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, my heart jumped. I tried to brush it off as a wrong number, but that was just the beginning. I got up, walked across the cramped hallway, and flipped on the living room light. The phone was on the wall near the kitchen door, and I remember how my hand shook a little as I reached for it. The ring was loud, almost punishing. I picked up the receiver and pressed it against my ear, expecting to hear some drunk person asking for the wrong apartment. Instead, there was only a scratchy sound. I listened for a moment, waiting for a voice. It came after a few seconds, a faint mumble buried under static. I couldn't catch any actual words. It sounded like someone standing far away from a microphone, letting out broken syllables. I muttered a confused hello, but there was no clear response, just more static. When I hung up, the phone echoed with a final burst of noise before going silent. I figured it was some technical glitch. Maybe there was a crossed line, or maybe the phone was just old. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling until morning. My skin felt clammy, and every tiny noise in the apartment made me tense up. I tried to distract myself by thinking about my job and my usual routine, but my mind kept looping back to that static. It felt like it was still ringing in my head. The next night I stayed up late with a book, half expecting the phone to ring again. When 3 in the morning rolled around, the phone stayed quiet. I let out a short laugh, feeling silly for worrying so much. Then, just as I was about to close the book and switch off the light, the phone rang. It was the same sound, one shrill ring after another. I noticed that the clock on my nightstand showed 3 a.m. exactly. My stomach dropped and I held my breath for a second. I got up slowly. My muscles felt tight and my chest was burning from how long I'd been holding my breath. I stepped into the living room, feeling the cool floor under my bare feet. I lifted the receiver. Static greeted me again, louder than before. Then I heard a faint voice. It lasted for 1 or 2 seconds. I couldn't make out every single word, but I swear it sounded like me. My own voice was mumbling something I couldn't quite piece together. My throat went dry. I asked, "Who is this?" in a raspy tone. The static hissed and the line cut off. I put the phone back and stared at it. I had an urge to rip it from the wall, but I didn't. I stood there, Until I realized my heart was pounding so hard I felt lightheaded. I forced myself back to bed, but sleep didn't come over the next week. The calls repeated every time the phone rang at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. Every time I heard static and bits of words that sounded like my own voice. Some nights I caught little fragments of phrases, things I'd never told anyone before, private details about events from years ago. It felt like someone was peeling back layers of my mind. I'd feel a chill spread across my arms and my chest would tighten until it hurt to breathe. One night I tried ignoring the ring. I stayed in bed counting the rings, waiting for them to stop. They didn't. It went on for maybe 2 straight minutes, and it felt like torture. My body trembled with each new ring. The sound echoed through the dark room, and I swore I could feel it vibrating through the walls. I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped out of bed, ran to the phone, and snatched it off the hook. The static burst in, followed by what I can only describe as a faint echo of my own voice. It repeated something I recognized, a memory from when I was a teenager, something I never shared with anybody. Hearing it made my palms sweat. My voice on the other end sounded distant, like it was coming through a tunnel. I yelled into the phone, "Stop calling me." There was a low buzz and then nothing. My own shouting echoed back at me for a moment, distorted. Then the call ended. My knees felt weak. I leaned against the wall for support. I started sleeping with every light on in the apartment. I couldn't handle the darkness. I'd lie on my bed staring at the bright white walls, listening for any sound. My eyes burned from lack of rest. I started making mistakes at work, missing deadlines and forgetting simple tasks. My boss called me into his office one afternoon to ask if everything was all right. I just told him I wasn't sleeping well. I didn't talk about the phone calls. I didn't have a logical explanation. After another week of these calls, I tried unplugging the phone. I took out the cable from the wall jack around midnight. I tested it to make sure the line was dead. I picked up the receiver, heard no dial tone, and finally felt a small sense of relief. I remember telling myself that I'd outsmarted whatever was happening that night. I fell asleep with the lights on, but I at least hoped I'd get some rest. At exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, the phone rang again. I shot upright in bed, my heart banging in my chest. At first I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd unplugged the phone. There was no way it could ring, but there it was, blasting through the apartment like any normal phone call. I walked over and saw that the cord was still lying on the floor, completely disconnected. My hand shook as I picked up the receiver. Static flooded my ear. I spoke softly, "Hello." A voice hissed back, "Listen." That was the only word I caught. It sounded like me, but my voice was scratchy and broken. I froze. The static rose, and I heard a faint groan on the other side. I felt a bolt of cold fear in my chest. My hand cramped around the receiver, and I couldn't let go. I tried to breathe, but my throat felt locked. Then just as suddenly the line went dead. I put the phone down and stared at the disconnected cord. It didn't make any sense. My pulse was racing and I felt a sweat break out on my forehead. I shoved the phone off the hook. I buried it under a pile of old towels in the clock closet, hoping that would muffle any noise if it rang again. Then I went back to my bedroom, sat on the bed and tried to calm down. My heartbeat was pounding in my ears. I forced myself to take slow breaths. I stayed awake until dawn with the hallway light shining under my bedroom door. When the sun rose, I went straight to the hardware store. I bought a new phone, figuring maybe the old phone was defective. I also picked up a few tools to change the wiring in the wall jack. By late afternoon, I had a brand new phone installed. I tested it, dial tone, everything seemed normal. I told myself the problem was solved, but I felt uneasy. I dreaded 3 a.m. That night I sat at my kitchen table drinking strong coffee. I was determined to face whatever was happening. 3 o'clock came and the new phone stayed silent. I stared at it waiting for the ring, but nothing happened. My shoulders started to relax. I allowed myself a small grin, thinking maybe I'd beaten this weird glitch or whatever it was. I was about to stand up and go to bed when the new phone let out a sharp, shrill ring. I nearly toppled my coffee mug. My throat tightened and my skin prickled. I reached for the phone, but my hand hesitated. I forced myself to answer. The line was full of static, just like before. Then came that faint voice, my own voice. It repeated a single phrase, "You know what you did." My lungs felt squeezed. I couldn't respond. My mouth went dry. The static cut out and the line went silent. I slammed the phone down and grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. For the next few nights the pattern continued. The calls arrived right at 3 in the morning. Sometimes I heard a broken sentence, sometimes just a breathy sound like a faint exhale. That I reached out and picked up the receiver with stiff fingers. Static. Then my voice whispered, "You can't hide." I pressed the receiver against my chest, feeling my heart hammering. I let the phone slip from my hand and crash onto the floor. I tried to calm down by stepping outside for some fresh air, but I only managed a few steps down the hallway before I turned back. The phone was in the apartment and I felt an urge to be near it, even though it terrified me. My mind was racing with thoughts, but I kept telling myself to focus on my senses. The sensation of the doorknob under my hand, the sound of the quiet hallway, the chill of the apartment's stale air against my skin. It was the only way I kept from completely panicking. Over the next few days I began waiting by the phone. Each night I'd stare at it, gripping the arm of my couch. My nerves felt raw. Sometimes the ring came a few seconds after 3 saw. Sometimes it was right on the dot. Each time I answered, and each time I heard some garbled version of my own voice telling me things I'd never say aloud. The voice didn't threaten me, but it taunted me. It reminded me of moments I wanted to forget, whispered details about my life that no one else knew. I tried talking back. I asked it what it wanted. I begged it to leave me alone. I yelled at it. Nothing worked. The calls ended on their own time, leaving me shaking. I stopped leaving the apartment altogether. I felt trapped. My only contact with the outside world was occasional grocery deliveries and my cell phone. I heard the landline ring at 3 in the morning every single night. Sometimes I answered, sometimes I didn't. It made no difference. The calls wouldn't stop. Last night I sat in the living room with all the lights on. I had the phone in front of me on the coffee table. I watched the numbers on the digital clock creep closer to 3 arc air. I felt sweat rolling down my face and neck. My mouth was dry and my eyes were heavy, but I couldn't sleep. When the clock switched to 3 wire, I held my breath. The ring started piercing the silence. I lifted the receiver. The static buzzed and a warped version of my voice said, "Why are you running?" My breath came in short gasps. My palms were slippery. I set the phone down without saying a word. The call ended on its own after a few seconds. Now it's morning. I haven't slept and I'm sitting here in my living room trying to decide what to do next. The phone is on the table. It's silent for the moment, but I know it will ring again tonight exactly at 3. I'm afraid to disconnect it. That hasn't helped anyway. I can't stand the thought of smashing it to pieces because I'm scared the calls might come through some other way, like my cell phone or my computer speakers or maybe even the TV. I still don't have an explanation. I know the calls aren't coming from anyone I can trace. I tried calling the phone company, but they said they have no record of incoming calls at that hour. I feel like I've looked for every logical answer and I found nothing. The worst part is recognizing my own voice on the other end, like I'm hearing a twisted version of myself. It's a voice that's telling me secrets I never shared with anyone. My mind keeps spinning over that detail. I can't think about the future. I can't plan beyond 3 o'clock. All I do is wait, feeling that dread build up in my stomach. My hands won't stop shaking. My eyelids twitch every now and then from exhaustion. I've lost track of day and night. I just watch the clock and wait for the ring. I don't know how this will end. I can't leave the apartment because I know the call will come wherever I am. I don't trust any solution to get rid of this phone or the voice on the line. I feel stuck every night. The call rips me from any attempt at peace. I'm tired of being scared, but I can't see a way out. Tonight will be the same, me waiting, the clock ticking and the phone ringing at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. I'll answer it and I'll hear that static. I'll wait for the words, dreading them but needing to listen, and I don't know if it will ever stop. I moved into this house 6 weeks ago. On the day I signed the lease, the place felt quiet. The walls looked worn and the floors creaked, but I got used to that. I didn't care about the old gas system, even though the pipes ran through half the walls. I just wanted a decent rent and some space to myself. By the second week I noticed strange sounds near the kitchen at night. I chalked it up to old metal and shifting temperatures, but last Thursday I heard an actual voice. It wasn't loud, but it had a nervous tone. It echoed through the metal ducts that run under the floor and up into the ceiling. It repeated a few words, something like, "It's dark, so dark." I stood there in my pajamas staring at the vent under the sink, heart pounding. I wasn't hallucinating. I heard it again the next night and the night after that. My name's Paul. I'm 37 years old and I work construction during the day. My back hurts after a full shift and normally I sleep like a rock, but not here, not in this house. I have trouble sleeping because every night around midnight those murmurs start. The pipes run through the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, and even my bedroom. They're everywhere. Sometimes I hear a quiet rasp like someone clearing their throat. Other times it sounds like a panicked whisper, words rolling through the metal tubes and bouncing off the walls. I started to leave the TV on at night, hoping to drown out the sounds, but the voices always cut through. They vibrated my skull when I lie in bed. I tried ignoring it. I cranked up some music on my phone, but the voice kept coming back. Usually after midnight, I finally decided to take a closer look at the old records of the house. The landlord isn't around much, so I spent a Saturday morning at the county clerk's office. I found out the previous tenant left in a hurry. Actually, not just left, he disappeared. His name was Elliot Harris and no one could say for sure where he went. The records showed that he'd lived here for 3 years, paid rent on time and never reported any problems except for a complaint about the gas pipes. After that complaint, everything went quiet. A few months later he vanished. The landlord claimed he broke the lease and ran. The official story was that he left the country or moved to another city, but no one filed a missing persons report. No mention of a body, no mention of kids or any family, just a tenant who vanished. I felt tense when I read that. I pictured Elliot packing up in the middle of the night, hauling his stuff out without telling anyone. But why would he do that, and why did I keep hearing the same words at night about darkness and chains and regret? There were times the voice mentioned chains. I caught that word a few times. Chains can't move. So dark it gave me chills, and it still does. My stomach twists whenever I replay those moments in my head. I decided to run my own test. One night I stayed up late, turned off all the lights. I left my phone recording audio on the floor right next to the main gas vent in the living room. I sat on the couch and listened to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Around midnight the voice started. It came through faint at first, like a short puff of air. I felt my skin prickle, my heart sped up, my palms got sweaty. Then I heard a word, please. It was like a dry whisper coming from the vent behind the couch. I froze, my arms tensed. The voice echoed for a few seconds and vanished. I played back the recording and it was there, but I could only hear the faintest crackle, no clear words, just a hiss. Still, I know what I heard the next night. I moved the microphone into the hallway. I put my ear against the vent for a while, nothing. Then around 1 o'clock in the morning I heard something new. It sounded like someone rattling a chain against a metal surface. I heard a low moan, like a person struggling to speak. My throat felt tight. I got up, flicked on the hallway light, and stared at the vent. I saw nothing but dark slits in the metal. The air felt cold, and I noticed goosebumps on my forearms. The rattling noise faded after a few seconds. Then came the whisper again, something about can't breathe. I jumped back, my breath caught in my throat. That was enough for me that night. I shut my bedroom door, locked it, and lay awake listening to my own heartbeat. I didn't mention this to my coworkers or my friends. I knew they'd think I was nuts, but the nights kept getting worse. By the end of the 4th week I could hear the voice in almost every room. I walked through the house, flipping lights on and off, pressing my ear to different vents. The voice followed me like it knew where I was. Sometimes I thought I heard my name, other times it was just a series of ragged gasps, as if someone was stuck inside a small space. I started to wonder if Elliot somehow got trapped in the gas ducts. The idea sounded crazy. Human bodies can't fit inside those pipes. They're narrow and lined with corroded metal, but I couldn't get the thought out of my mind. Maybe there's a hidden opening or crawl space. Maybe he got in there and never got out. I decided to do a more thorough inspection. One Saturday morning I shut off the main gas valve. I turned off all the pilot lights just to be safe. Then I unscrewed a panel in the basement that covered part of the duct system. The panel was rusty and it took me a while to remove the old screws inside. I found a narrow metal tunnel that ran upward at a slight angle. It was about a foot wide. Dust coated the edges. I had to point a flashlight inside just to see anything. The tunnel curved and I couldn't get a good look past a few feet. The air smelled stale. I tried sliding my arm in with the flashlight. I could only reach so far. Nothing but dust and old spider webs. No sign of a body, no sign of bones or clothes. Still, I felt uneasy. My hand shook when I backed away. After that, I put the panel back and turned the gas on again. I tried not to think about it too much, but it stuck with me. I started having nightmares about crawling inside that duct. In these dreams I felt trapped. My shoulders scraped against metal. I couldn't move. My breath was shallow and I'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat. During the day I tried to keep busy with work, but every night the voice came back stronger than before. It sounded desperate, like it was calling out for help. I hear voices in my gas ducts. They'd probably dismiss me as paranoid or direct me to a mental health hotline. I'm not the type to jump to conclusions, so I put the phone down. I started searching the house for hidden rooms or crawl spaces. I checked every closet, knocked on every wall, even measured the rooms to see if there was a missing space behind the drywall. Everything seemed normal. Then I remembered I hadn't checked the attic thoroughly. There was a small hatch in the ceiling near the hallway. I grabbed a step ladder and climbed up. The attic was cramped with old insulation and a few boxes from previous tenants. The air was musty and my eyes stung. I shone the flashlight around. I found a few dusty boxes labeled. They were sealed with packing tape. I ripped one open. It had old clothes and some papers. I saw a small notebook. The cover had Elliot's name on it. My pulse quickened. I flipped through it, scanning The pap pages, most of it was scribbled notes about finances and grocery lists, but near the back there were a few sentences about hearing noises in the house. Elliot wrote that the house felt restless at night. He thought the pipes carried voices from somewhere else. He had nightmares about them. Said he heard chains rattling when he tried to sleep. He wrote, "I can't tell anyone, they'll think I'm crazy." My hands started shaking. These were the same experiences I was having. Then the entry stopped. I sealed the notebook in a Ziploc bag and put it on the kitchen table downstairs. I stood there thinking, my mind was racing. I looked at the duct vent above the stove. A faint hiss came from inside, like air passing through. Then I heard what sounded like someone trying to clear their throat. My chest tightened. I turned off the lights and just listened. The voice started again, calling out words like chains, regret, and can't see. My eyes darted around the dark kitchen. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I felt like something was behind me, but when I turned, there was only an empty chair. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning I felt drained. My face looked pale in the bathroom mirror, and my eyes had dark circles around them. My heart pounded. Even when I was in the shower, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was trapped in those ducts, someone who couldn't get out. Maybe it wasn't logical, but that's how it felt. I had to figure out a way to search deeper into the duct system or get someone who could do it. I called a handyman I knew, Tony, who sometimes worked with me on construction jobs. I told him I wanted to inspect the gas lines for potential blockages. I didn't mention voices. I just said I heard odd noises and wanted to be sure everything was safe. Tony came over in the afternoon. We went down to the basement. He tested the lines for leaks, but everything was fine. I asked him if we could open up more panels to see deeper inside. He gave me a weird look, but agreed. After removing a few sections of metal duct, we still didn't see anything. It was all small tunnels running through the house. Tony said maybe it was just old pipes expanding and contracting. He suggested I put more insulation around them. I nodded and thanked him, but I knew that wouldn't solve my problem. He left, and I was alone again that night. I woke up around 2 in the morning. The voice was louder than ever before. I sat up in bed, breathing fast, my forehead damp with sweat. I heard the words echoing from the vent near the ceiling. "I'm still here, please get me out." My stomach lurched. I jumped out of bed, flicked on the light, and pressed my ear against the vent. I whispered, "Hello." My voice shook. There was a pause, then a soft rasp helped me. My legs felt weak. I stumbled backward and almost fell over. I grabbed my phone and ran to the living room. The voice followed me, echoing through the ducts. I stood near the big vent by the TV. I could feel cold air brushing against my ankles. My mind was spinning. All I could think to do was talk back. I said, "Who are you? What do you want?" Silence for a moment. Then I heard Elliot. The voice sounded cracked, like a person who hadn't had water in days. My hand shook. The voice repeated, "Elliot," then stopped. I spent the rest of the night sitting on my couch, hugging my knees, eyes on the vent. Every sound made me jump. My mouth felt dry. My heart pounded like it was trying to break out of my chest. Every time I thought the voice was gone, I heard a faint rasp or a soft moan. I turned on the TV with no volume, just for some light. I didn't sleep at all. That brings me to now. I'm in the living room. It's close to midnight and the vents are quiet at the moment. My arms are covered in goosebumps. In the back of my neck feels clammy. The only sound is the buzz of the overhead light. I keep thinking about that moment when the voice said Elliot's name. It matched the notebook in the attic and the old records at the county clerk's office. It matches the stories about how he vanished. Somehow he's still here, or at least his voice is. I don't know how it's possible, but That's what it feels like. The voice comes through the ducks and begs for help. It talks about chains and darkness. It talks about regrets. I hear birds chirping in the branches, squirrels rustling in the leaves, small animals darting across the undergrowth. This time everything was silent. It wasn't just quiet, it felt like the air itself was tense. My neck started prickling, and I caught myself scanning the trees, looking for any sign of movement. I didn't see or hear anything, but I felt this unshakable sensation of being watched. I slowed down, stepping carefully to avoid making too much noise. The faint crunch of dirt and leaves sounded too loud in my ears. I tried to hold my breath and listen. After a few moments I heard a soft murmur like voices drifting through the trees. I couldn't make out words or even a clear direction. It was just a low, constant sound that made my arms break out in goosebumps. I turned my head to the left and right, trying to pinpoint it, but it shifted around me, sometimes near, sometimes far. I told myself it might be the wind or the creek that runs somewhere near the center of the woods, but I knew what water sounds like, and that definitely wasn't it. This was like multiple whispers layered on top of each other. I thought maybe other hikers were nearby, but I saw no one, and that feeling of being observed only got stronger. My heart pounded in my chest and my palms felt clammy. I wiped them on my pants and decided I'd had enough of this weird silence. I turned around, figuring I'd just head back to the car and maybe come back another day. That's when I realized I couldn't find the same path I'd come in on. I stood there certain I'd walked a straight line, but the trail behind me looked unfamiliar. The trees seemed closer together. I recognized the shape of a rock I had passed on my way in, but it was on the wrong side of the trail now. My pulse sped up. I tried to steady my breathing and told myself I must have made a wrong turn somewhere. I walked back the way I believed I'd come, keeping my eyes on the ground for my own footprints or any sign of the familiar route. I couldn't find anything. Instead, I ended up in a small clearing with a few large boulders. I had never seen that clearing before. The ground there was covered in damp leaves, and there was a single tree stump in the center, sawed off cleanly. I looked around for a path leading out, but the brush looked dense and I couldn't see a clear trail. I forced myself to keep calm. I decided to retrace my steps again, but I must have gotten turned around because I ended up back at that same clearing. The sky looked darker through the canopy, and I realized I had spent more time wandering than I thought. My heart hammered so hard that I felt it pounding in my ears. I had trouble focusing, and that murmuring sound seemed to get louder the more panicked I felt. I wiped sweat off my forehead and took a few deep breaths. I tried a different direction this time. I aimed for a cluster of tall pines that I remembered seeing earlier. If I could reach those, I thought I would find a familiar part of the trail. I started walking, pushing through thick brush and stepping over fallen logs. Thorns snagged on my pants and my legs started to itch. The backpack felt heavy and I readjusted it for comfort. Every so often I'd stop to listen for birds or small animals, hoping for any sign of normal life. The forest stayed silent. Only that faint whispering droned on like it was circling me. Eventually I saw a small path that looked like it might lead somewhere. I followed it, trying to keep track of landmarks like oddly shaped trees or big rocks so I wouldn't get lost again. The path wound deeper into the woods until it opened into another clearing even larger than the first. My stomach dropped. I had never seen this place before. The ground was covered in short grass and there were tall trees forming a ring around the perimeter. The light here was a bit stronger, but it had a hazy quality, like a thin mist hung in the air. I stood at the edge trying to decide whether to cross the clearing or turn back. At that moment I felt a sudden chill. The hair on my arm stood up and I sensed movement at the opposite side of the clearing. My heart lurched. I saw branches shift slightly, but there was no wind. I heard a soft rustling followed by silence. I stayed still, watching that spot. I tried to see if there was an animal or another person, but I couldn't make out a clear shape. My mouth went dry and I realized I was gripping the straps of my backpack so hard my fingers hurt. I turned around and started walking back the way I came, but the path was gone. Instead, I saw thick undergrowth and trees blocking my way. My eyes darted around, searching for any opening that resembled the trail I'd used. There was nothing. My breathing sped up. I felt sweat trickling down my temples and wiped it away with shaky hands. I tried to calm myself by speaking out loud, just simple statements like, "It's okay, I'm just a little turned around, I'll find the main trail." But hearing my own voice echo in that silent forest made my skin crawl. The whispering seemed to pause whenever I spoke, broke as if it was listening to me, then it started up again. After I stopped talking, I walked around the clearing edge, pushing aside branches, ducking under low limbs, looking for any sign of a proper path. My eyes kept catching small movements in my peripheral vision, but whenever I turned my head there was nothing there. My mind felt scrambled, and I couldn't figure out how I kept losing track of my location. After circling the clearing twice, I force myself to choose a direction and keep moving no matter what. I picked the side that looked the least dense. I marched forward, snapping twigs and brushing aside leaves, ignoring scratches on my arms. The forest seemed thicker than usual, like the trees had grown tighter together just to block my way. I finally pushed through into another area of the woods that had a few less vines and brambles. I exhaled in relief and tried to get my bearings. The sky overhead was taking on a deeper hue, telling me the afternoon was slipping away faster than I wanted. I knew I needed to find a familiar trail soon, or I'd be stuck in these woods. After sunset, the tension in my body felt like a knot in my chest. My legs felt heavier with each step. I listened hard for any normal forest sounds, but I still heard that low murmur. It sounded closer now, almost like it was in my ears, but I couldn't pinpoint the source. My heart pounded and I tried to move faster even though my muscles were starting to ache. Then I spotted something that made me stop short. A broken signpost leaning against a large oak tree. The wood looked weathered and the lettering was faded, but I thought it might have been a marker for one of the lesser used trails. I felt a small surge of hope. I walked over to it, kneeling down to see if I could read anything. The letters were mostly worn off, but I could make out something like ill loop. I guessed it might be part of a name for a loop trail. I looked around for the rest of the sign or any arrows pointing the way. Nothing, but if the sign was here, maybe I was near a real path. I scanned the ground and saw what appeared to be a narrow trail leading away from the tree. I immediately started following it, feeling my chest tighten with anticipation. My feet crunched over dry leaves and I heard the faint rustle of something in the undergrowth beside me. I refused to look. I just kept going. The path veered around a group of young saplings, then dipped down into a slight gully. I stumbled on a loose rock and nearly twisted my ankle, but I caught myself. My breath came out in ragged gasps, and I reminded myself to slow down. My mind kept flashing with images of the clearing and the strange movements I thought I'd seen at the edge of my vision. That feeling of being watched lingered. I felt goosebumps on my arms again as I climbed out of the gully. The path broadened a bit and the trees seemed more spaced out. I started to recognize the shape of certain trunks, the curve of certain branches. I breathed a sigh of relief because it felt familiar. Then I realized it wasn't the main trail, but another side path I'd used once before. If I followed it to the left, I believed it would connect to the main trail. In a short distance, I took that left turn, feeling a jolt of adrenaline. My body felt shaky and my knees wobbled as I walked, but I pushed forward. The forest around me remained silent, but the whispering seemed to fade a bit. I heard only a faint trace of it now, like it was far behind me, or maybe just in my imagination. I tried to ignore it. Each step felt heavy and my lungs burned from how tense I'd been. I kept going, scanning the trees for the shape of the main path. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted the distinctive row of flat stones that marked the official hiking trail. When I finally stepped onto that main trail, I let out a shaky laugh. I felt relief flood my body, but I also felt an urgent need to get out of there. I jogged along the trail toward the exit, not caring if I looked ridiculous. My legs throbbed and I could feel sweat soaking my shirt. Still, I kept going, ignoring the branches that slapped against my arms. After a few minutes, I spotted the sunlight breaking through the last row of trees. I burst out of the forest and onto the gravel parking area. Seeing my car up ahead, I slowed down just enough to catch my breath and fumbled for my keys in my pocket. My hands were trembling. I looked back at the forest entrance. For a moment the trees stood still and I couldn't hear any birds. I felt that last hint of tension lingering in the air. I opened my car door, threw my backpack onto the passenger seat and climbed in. My heart was still beating too fast. I started the engine and turned on the air conditioning, letting the cold air hit my face. I locked the doors out of instinct, then stared at the line of trees in front of me. I couldn't shake the sense that something was still watching, but I forced myself to shift into gear and drive away. As I pulled out of the lot, I caught a glimpse of movement in my review mirror. It could have been a branch swaying or an animal darting by. For a second my chest tightened again and I wanted to slam on the brakes, but I told myself to keep going, to leave that place behind. I don't know why the forest felt so wrong that day, and I don't know what caused that total silence or those strange whispers. I only know I never want to feel that again. I want to go back to a normal hiking experience where birds sing and squirrels chatter, but this time I can't forget the way the forest shifted around me as if it tried to lock me inside. That feeling still sends a shiver through me whenever I think about it, and I'm not sure if I'll never step onto that trail with the same confidence again. I first noticed the change in the door on a Thursday night. I was walking down the hallway heading to my bedroom when I stopped in front of the storage room. The door looked different. It was in the same corridor, but it seemed a few inches off from where it used to be. I remember pausing with my hand on the wall. The space between the door frame and the light switch appeared smaller. I stood there for a long moment trying to figure out if my memory was playing tricks on me. I even checked the floor looking for scuff marks. It all felt wrong. That room had always been a place I avoided. It was stuffed with boxes and broken furniture. I kept it locked and I rarely went inside unless I needed something old or forgotten. The lock was a simpler key and knob type, and I usually left the key in a drawer in my desk. That night though, I decided to open it. I thought maybe a hinge had come loose, or maybe I had just installed the door incorrectly years ago. As soon as I realized the shift might not be my imagination, I felt a dull pressure in my chest. It was the kind of physical tension you get when something seems off, but you can't pin down why. I grabbed the key from my desk and walked back to the hallway. I slid the key into the lock. The lock clicked open without resistance. Right away I noticed that the door felt heavier than usual. I pushed it and the hinges squeaked in a way I hadn't heard before. The interior was dark. I reached for the light switch on the wall just inside, but my hand touched rough paint. The switch wasn't there. My breath caught in my throat and I took a step back. I let my eyes adjust to the darkness. The usual boxes and junk were gone. Instead I saw a small room with walls covered in strange Symbols they looked like they had been painted or carved. It was hard to tell with so little light. I stood in the doorway trying to make sense of it. My stomach felt tight and I noticed my palms were sweating. I couldn't see the floor clearly, but it looked like dirt or concrete. I didn't smell anything unusual. The air was stale, but I didn't catch any specific odor. It was just dark and silent in there. My heart pounded and I leaned forward squinting, but I didn't want to step inside. That pressure in my chest got stronger. I pulled the door shut and locked it again. I felt my pulse throbbing in my neck. I needed to calm down. I walked away trying to convince myself that I'd made a mistake. Maybe I opened the wrong door. That sounded stupid because there's only one door in that spot. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water and sat at the table. My legs felt shaky. My mind started racing. I considered opening it again right away, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I decided I'd wait until the morning. Maybe the daylight would make everything clearer. I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up thinking I heard noises in the hallway. It sounded like soft scraping or a gentle tap on the wall. Each time I got up to check, I found nothing. The corridor was silent and the door was closed. I even placed a small strip of tape at the base of the door to see if it would move. It didn't, but I still felt watched. When morning came, I walked right to that door. The tape was in the same place. The door looked like it had slid again, maybe another inch. I couldn't be sure. I felt the same uneasy flutter in my stomach. I unlocked it and pushed it open. The space inside had changed again. It wasn't the small room with symbols anymore. It looked like a narrow hallway stretching into darkness. The walls were made of concrete blocks and there was an exposed pipe near the ceiling dripping water onto the floor. I saw faint puddles on the concrete. The sound of dripping water echoed. I took a step in. This time I could hear the drip more clearly and the air felt damp and cold. The passage extended maybe 10 feet before it turned sharply to the left. I couldn't see beyond that corner. My heart was hammering against my ribs and I felt goosebumps on my arms. There was something about the air in there that made my chest feel tight. It was like standing in a closed bathroom full of steam, but there wasn't any steam. I swallowed hard and backed out. I closed the door again. My hand shook when I locked it. I spent the rest of the day trying to pretend it wasn't happening. I worked on my computer, cleaned the living room, and avoided the hallway. My mind kept drifting back to that door. I wanted to call someone, but I didn't know who. A contractor, the police? That sounded ridiculous. I thought about telling a friend, but the idea of explaining that my storage room had turned into a creepy hallway made me feel like an idiot. That night I heard sounds again. It wasn't tapping now, it was more like scratching. I got up and stood in the hallway. My skin prickled when I realized the sound was coming from inside that door. The handle rattled once and I jumped back. I held my breath waiting, but it didn't happen again. I wanted to open it right then, but I couldn't push myself to do it. I backed away and went to bed staring at the ceiling for hours. The next morning the door seemed to have shifted again. It looked closer to the bedroom door by a couple of inches. I felt dizzy looking at it. It didn't make sense for a door frame to move around in a solid wall. I touched the edges of the frame. The surface felt normal, but it was definitely not in the same place. I opened it, and this time I saw a cramped chamber with a single overhead light fixture that flickered on and off. The light was weak and kept blinking, which made the shadows shift constantly. The floor was covered in old tiles, cracked and dirty. The walls had peeling paint and there were some steel shelves along one side with empty jars. The jars had smudged labels I couldn't read. There was also a squealing noise from somewhere in the darkness, like a faulty fan belt. I couldn't tell if it was mechanical or if something else was causing it. I stepped in, carefully shuddering at the flickering light. My mouth felt dry. I reached out and touched one of the shelves. It felt cold. I heard a clang in the corner and I jerked my head in that direction. I couldn't see anything because the light was too weak. My pulse drummed in my ears. The squealing noise rose in pitch for a moment, then stopped. I felt a sudden need to leave. I walked backward to the door, keeping my eyes on that dark corner. Once I crossed the threshold, I slammed the door shut and locked it. I tried to go about my day, but the tension in my body wouldn't fade. My jaw felt tight, my neck HDHD. I kept glancing at the hallway, afraid it might move again. I didn't know what to do with this problem. I thought about nailing the door shut or even moving out of the house, but that felt extreme. I tried searching online for anything related to doors changing places or leading to strange rooms. I didn't find anything that matched my situation. I saw a bunch of supernatural forums and weird websites, but they all sounded made up. I wasn't sure what I believed anyway. All I knew was that each time I opened the door I found a new place inside. I considered leaving the house for a while, maybe staying at a friend's place, but I worried about what might happen if I wasn't there to watch it. The idea of something or someone coming out of that door while I was gone made my stomach churn. I decided to stay and see if I could gather more information. It felt foolish, but I also couldn't just ignore it. That evening I heard the handle rattle again. I walked to the hallway, stopping a few feet away from the door. My throat felt tight and I could feel my pulse in my hands. The handle rattled once more, then I heard a low scraping sound like metal against wood. I stared at the doorknob. It was turning slowly. The lock was still engaged, so the door didn't open. I stood there, fists clenched, until the doorknob stopped moving. Then everything went quiet. I waited, counting the seconds in my head. When I felt sure the noise had stopped, I inched closer and placed my palm on the door. It felt cold, like an outside door in winter. I held my breath and pressed my ear against the surface. I could hear a soft clicking sound like someone tapping a fingernail on the other side. My heart started pounding again and I pulled away. I stepped back, keeping my eyes on the doorknob. I reached into my pocket for the key. I slid it into the lock, bracing myself. Then I turned the knob and opened the door fast, hoping to catch whatever was there by surprise. Inside I found a wide basement-like space. The ceiling was low with exposed beams. The walls were rough stone. A single light bulb hung from a cord in the center, casting a dim glow. I didn't see anyone. I took a few steps inside, hearing my boots scrape against the concrete. A damp smell filled the space. In one corner there was a large wooden crate pried open. Inside the crate I saw rusty tools. There were hammers, wrenches and saws, all covered in a thin layer of dirt. I could hear a faint humming noise, but I couldn't pinpoint the source. My heart was racing and I felt a pulse in my temples. I slowly made my way toward the crate, my muscles tense. I didn't see anything else in the basement, no doors or windows. As I stood near the crate, the humming got louder. It was a low vibration that made my stomach feel uneasy. I spun around, thinking I saw a shadow move along the far wall, but there was nothing there. I held my breath again and backed away, never turning my back to the corners. I exited the room, locked the door and stumbled backward into the hallway. I didn't open the door again that night. I couldn't handle it. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, jumping at every small noise. At around midnight I noticed the door had moved again. It was closer to my bedroom door than ever before. The shift was unmistakable. I saw a gap on the other side of the frame that hadn't been there before. That detail made me feel nauseous. The idea that it was creeping toward me was too much. I forced myself to stay away from it. The next morning I saw the handle jiggling. When I walked past, I hadn't touched it yet. I stood there watching it shake as though someone was Inside, pulling at it, my chest felt tight and I tried to breathe slowly. My first instinct was to run out the front door and never come back, but I couldn't just leave. I wanted to face it and see what would happen. I went to my desk, grabbed the key and returned to the hallway. I stopped in front of the door. The handle was still moving. My hand was shaking as I put the key in the lock. I turned it slowly and I heard the internal mechanism click. I gripped the knob and swung the door open. Darkness greeted me again, a black space that seemed deeper than any of the previous rooms. I couldn't see the floor or the walls. It felt like a void, and a cold draft rushed past me. The air made my eyes water. My entire body tensed up. I tried to see if there were walls or objects, but it was pitch black. The doorknob was steady in my hand, but I felt a slight tremor in the metal, like it was vibrating. I stood there holding the door open, trying to see or hear something. My breath was ragged and my heart was pounding so hard that my chest hurt. That tightness around my lungs made it hard to breathe. My mind was screaming at me to close the door, but my curiosity kept me rooted in place. Then I heard a faint shuffling sound from somewhere deep in the dark. It was like heavy fabric being dragged across a rough surface. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. My hand started to shake uncontrollably. I couldn't stand it any longer. I slammed the door shut and twisted the lock. My ears were ringing and my legs felt weak. I leaned against the wall, sucking in air. Every muscle in my body was rigid and my mind was racing. I've never felt so on edge. Even though the door was locked, I kept picturing whatever was inside that black space. I felt sure it was watching me. Now I'm sitting in the living room writing all this down in a spiral notebook. I keep glancing at the hallway, expecting that door to lurch even closer. I still hear soft scraping sounds every few minutes, but I can't bring myself to check. My body feels tense and my head is pounding. I know I can't live like this. I'm thinking about leaving, but I'm also worried about what might happen if I do. I don't know if this door will keep moving or if something will come out of it. I'm not sure if it wants to come into my house or if it just wants me to keep opening it. I don't know how this started and I don't know how to make it stop. All I can do is wait and see what happens the next time the door moves. Every time I open it, I see another place. Every time I close it, I feel that stifling presence grows stronger. I'm trying to stay calm, but I can't ignore the way my skin crawls when I walk down that hallway. I keep the door locked, but I'm not sure if a simple lock even matters anymore. I plan to stay awake tonight, sitting in a chair facing the hallway. If I see the handle move, I'll decide on the spot what to do. I might open it one last time or I might barricade it shut. I haven't made up my mind. My chest is still tight and my mouth tastes bitter. My body is trembling off and on and I have a constant headache. I can't concentrate on anything else. All I can focus on is that door and whatever waits behind it. I don't see how this ends well, but I can't run from it either. I have to face it or live with the fear every day. Right now I'm trying to gather my courage, but my nerves are shot. I keep hearing those faint scratching sounds in the dark and I can't tell if they're real or in my head. That's everything that's happened so far. I'm still here. And the door is still there, shifting inch by inch. I'm not sure what I'll find the next time I open it. I only know that each time the space behind it grows stranger and the sense of being watched grows stronger. I can't see a clear way out of this situation for now. I keep the door locked and I wait for the next sound. I woke up at around 2 in the morning with a dry throat and a strong craving for water. I remember it clearly because my mouth felt like sandpaper and my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I shuffled out of bed, still half asleep, and stumbled down the hallway. My house was quiet and the only sound I heard was the faint buzzing of the refrigerator. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I know my own place well enough to move around in the dark without bumping into things. My plan was simple: grab glass, fill it up at the sink and go back to bed. But the moment I reached the living room, I stopped dead in my tracks. There was a new painting on the wall right next to the television. I didn't recognize it at first because it was too dark, but I could tell it wasn't something I owned. It looked like a single figure shrouded in darkness with no visible face. My heart beat faster and my entire body tensed up. I kept thinking I must be seeing things because I was half awake. I switched on the nearest lamp and a weak yellow light fell across the canvas. That's when I realized this wasn't a dream. The painting was real. It showed a tall figure with its head turned slightly as if it was looking at something outside the frame. The face was just a blur of shadows, no features, nothing I could identify as eyes or a mouth. My stomach twisted. I know my own living room, and I know that wall was bare yesterday. I started to question my memory, but the feeling, my gut told me something was wrong. My heart pounded in my chest and I took a deep breath. I wanted to calm myself, but it felt impossible with that thing staring at me. At least it felt like it was staring. It had no eyes, but the intensity was there. I moved closer to the painting even though my instincts told me to stay back. I couldn't see any signature. The paint looked fresh in some spots, like it was still drying. It had that faint smell of turpentine or oil. My arms felt cold even though the house was at a normal temperature. My breathing grew shallow. I sat down, the empty glass on my coffee table, and reached out to touch the frame. It was wooden, thick, and there were small flecks of black paint near the corners. I asked myself, who could have broken into my house just to hang a painting that didn't make any sense? Though why wouldn't they steal something instead? The TV, maybe my laptop, but nothing was missing. I checked the door and windows, but all locks were still in place. No sign of forced entry. I felt uneasy, but I told myself maybe I was mistaken. Maybe I had bought something at a flea market and forgotten, but I knew that wasn't the truth. The adrenaline was wearing off and I felt thirsty again, so I got my glass of water and headed back to bed. I closed my bedroom door, locked it, and tried to push the thought of that strange painting out of my head. When I finally fell asleep, I thought I'd wake up to find it was all just a weird episode, but the next morning the painting was gone. I walked into the living room half expecting it to be there, but the wall was bare again. I even ran my hand across the spot where I'd seen it. There was nothing, not even a mark on the paint. My mind raced with questions, but I had no answers. I went on with my morning routine, though I felt on edge. Every small noise in the house made me jump. A few days went by without incident. I tried to forget about it. Then late one evening I was in the kitchen making myself a sandwich when I saw something dark at the corner of my eye. I turned around and there it was again, hanging on the opposite wall near the pantry. Same faceless figure, same frame, same cold feeling in my gut. My throat closed up and I felt sweat beating on my forehead. My pulse hammered in my ears. I rushed forward, grabbed the painting off the wall and held it in my hands. It felt solid, slightly rough on the back, like an old canvas. I swore under my breath. I decided then and there to destroy it. I thought maybe if I burned it I'd be rid of it for good. I carried it out to the backyard, set it on the concrete and grabbed a lighter from my pocket. My hand shook as I flicked the lighter and tried to hold the flame against the canvas, but before the fire could catch, the painting just disappeared. It slipped out of my fingers like I was holding smoke. I swear I felt the frame in my hands 1 second and the next there was nothing. The only thing left behind was a small pile of black dust or soot on the ground. I stared at it, heart pounding. Then I scooped it up and threw it in the trash. After that I stayed awake most nights, sitting in my living room With the lights on, I felt like I was waiting for something to happen. My nerves were shot. I barely ate. My appetite was gone, replaced by a deep sense of dread. I kept checking every wall, every corner, even my closet. I'd open doors slowly, expecting to see that painting inside. Sometimes I'd find nothing, other times I'd see it right in front of me. Just for a second, then it would vanish. Once I saw it reflected in my bathroom mirror as if it was behind me, but when I whipped around there was nothing there. My chest felt tight and my breathing got shallow every time I spotted it. I didn't know what to do. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That a painting kept appearing and disappearing in my house. One night I got so fed up I decided to watch every inch of the house. I thought maybe I could catch it in the ACT, see how it showed up. I set up a few old security cameras I'd had in a closet, pointed them at the main walls. I forced myself to stay awake, pacing around, checking the monitors. I drank too much coffee. My head throbbed and my eyelids felt like bricks, but around 3 o'clock in the morning I dozed off. When I woke up an hour later, I checked the footage. One of the cameras on the living room wall showed the painting coming into view at exactly 3:30. It just faded in. There was no hand placing it there. It was like it formed out of the air. Then 15 minutes later it dissolved. I played the clip over and over, feeling a deep chill run through me. I couldn't believe my eyes. I didn't want to believe it, but there it was, recorded on video. I started to dread being in my own house. Whenever it got dark, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, like someone was standing just behind me. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps or the sound of a frame scraping against a wall. I kept telling myself it was just the pipes or the house settling, but each time I checked I'd catch a glimpse of the painting somewhere, like a silent visitor that refused to leave. I didn't know how to fight something that wasn't physical. Every time I tried to remove it, it would vanish from my hands, leaving that same dirty residue behind. One evening I got an idea to try a different approach. Instead of burning it, I tried to tear it apart. I walked straight up to it when it appeared in the hallway, grabbed the top edge and pulled with all my strength. My arm strained and sweat dripped down my temples. For a second it felt like I was making progress. I heard a slight rip, then the whole thing dissolved again right between my fingers. It left a streak of black on my palms like charcoal. I scrubbed my hands raw that night, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something had touched me back. At that point I thought about just ignoring it, acting like it wasn't there, but I couldn't. Even if I left the room, I knew it was behind that door mounted on my wall. Defying logic, I stepped forward and stared at it. I couldn't see any detail in the face, just darkness. My hands shook at my sides, my stomach churned. I wondered if I'd lose my mind if this kept going. I tried something different. I talked out loud. I just said, "What do you want from me?" I felt stupid talking to an inanimate object, but I was desperate. If it didn't respond, it just stayed there silent and cold. My pulse raced and I had to walk out of the bathroom before I started panicking. I slammed the door behind me and slumped against the wall, rubbing my temples. My heart wouldn't slow down. My mouth felt dry. I sat there for a good 10 minutes trying to calm down. I began searching online for stories about cursed objects. I tried to find any explanation, maybe some weird phenomenon, but everything I saw was filled with folklore or fantasy talk. I wanted something concrete, but I found nothing. I tried calling an acquaintance who's into strange collectibles. He couldn't help me. He thought I was messing with him. Eventually I realized I was on my own. I started leaving every light on day and night. I thought maybe the brightness would keep it away, but it didn't. No matter what I did, it just kept showing up whenever it wanted to. Sometimes it was in the attic, sometimes in the hallway, sometimes in my bedroom if I left the door Open the pattern made no sense. There was no fixed interval, no predictable schedule. The worst moments were when I felt like it was watching me even without eyes. I sensed its focus on me. My hands would get clammy and I'd feel a tingle at the base of my neck. It was like an alarm going off inside my head. I try not to look at it, but it's hard to ignore. Something so strange in your own home. Each time I saw it, I'd feel adrenaline surge through my body. My muscles would tense up and my breathing would become quick and shallow. I'd run to another room or try some new method of destroying it, but nothing worked. It always melted away into thin air, leaving behind that dark powder. At one point I tried to paint over it. I got a large brush and a bucket of white paint. When I found the painting in the guest bedroom, I dragged a chair over, climbed up and started slapping paint across the canvas. The wet bristles smudged across the figure's torso, and for a second I thought I was making real progress. Then it began to fade again. The wet paint dripped onto the floor, leaving me staring at an empty wall. I stood there, paintbrush in hand, panting like I'd run a marathon. I left the house again that night because I couldn't handle the tension. Now I'm stuck in this cycle of coming and going, never really finding peace. My stomach stays in knots. I get splitting headaches from lack of sleep. My hands tremble. When I think about that shadowy figure on the canvas, I try to focus on normal tasks, cleaning, cooking, paying bills, but every time I let my guard down, I see it again out of the corner of my eye or reflecting in some surface. I've tried ignoring it, I've tried confronting it, I've tried destroying it. Nothing changes. It's always there, slipping between my walls whenever it wants, leaving me on edge. I'm at a point now where I feel like the painting is waiting for something. I sense that one day it'll reveal more of itself. Maybe the face will become clear or it'll start moving. I don't know what it wants and I don't know how to make it stop. I just know that I feel it watching me all the time. My chest feels tight and my mouth goes dry when I think about what could happen if it shows me its full form. For now I keep the lights on and I stay away as often as I can, but I always have to come back eventually. Every time I open my front door I feel a rush of fear, like I'm stepping onto unstable ground. I never know which wall it'll choose next or if it'll vanish right when I try to confront it. There's no pattern and no explanation. It's like I'm locked in this bizarre standoff with something that shouldn't exist, and it won't leave me alone. It doesn't get tired and it doesn't make demands. It's just there, haunting my space in complete silence. I wish I had a solution or a plan, but right now I don't. All I can do is keep living here and hoping one day the painting decides to move on, but deep down I feel like it's waiting to show me something. That thought makes my pulse spike and my breath go short every single time. I don't know if I'm strong enough to see it. Until then I just live with it, checking every corner, every wall, every mirror. Always on edge, always expecting that shadowy figure to appear. I'm sure that eventually I'll reach a breaking point, but I haven't yet. For now I'm stuck in this endless loop, caught in a game I never asked to play, with a painting that refuses to let me go. I noticed that scarecrow on a Sunday morning. I was standing by my back window looking out at the wide field behind my house. I'd never seen anyone out there. The field belongs to a neighbor I've never really met. I only know his name from the mailbox on the road, and I never see any vehicles in his driveway. That morning the scarecrow just appeared in the center of the field. Its shape was rough, like someone had thrown together some old clothes and stuffed them with straw. Its head was a dirty piece of cloth with 2 black button eyes sewn on. I realized it was turned in my direction, facing my window. It didn't matter how I shifted my body or craned my neck, those button eyes always seemed locked on me. I felt a chill spread across my arms the moment I noticed it. My house is small, but I like the privacy, and I'm used to quiet days with no signs of life in that field. Now there was this figure out there, and it felt like it was staring back. I leaned closer to the glass and tried to see if there was something else around it. There was nothing else, no footprints or signs of someone walking, just tall grass, some patches of dirt and that scarecrow stuck on a wooden post. I told myself it was just a normal scarecrow. Maybe my neighbor finally decided to put it up, but I kept glancing out the window all day. Every time it seemed like its head was angled in my direction. In the afternoon, I stepped onto the back porch to take a better look. The field was quiet, the sunlight was warm on my skin, and a few birds were singing. The scarecrow stood there. The wind blew through the grass, rustling the scarecrow's straw LMB limbs, but I couldn't see anything weird. I still felt uneasy. My hands got sweaty, and I had this urge to go back inside. I shut the door harder than usual. That first night I couldn't sleep well. I'd turn over, close my eyes, but thoughts of that ragged shape wouldn't leave my mind. Around midnight, I got up to grab a drink of water. I peeked out the window over my sink. The moonlight lit up the field enough for me to see the outline of the scarecrow. It looked a bit closer to my property, though I couldn't be sure. My heart thumped faster. I told myself I was just imagining things. I stood there for a few minutes staring. Eventually I saw its arm move. I thought it was the wind, but it felt too deliberate. The right arm seemed to shift upward, then back down. I stopped breathing for a moment. My throat got tight. I set my glass down and went straight back to my bedroom, locking the door. Even though it made no logical sense, I couldn't shake that feeling that I was being watched. In the morning, I found bits of straw on my back porch. My door was locked and all the windows were shut. I went outside, crouched down, and touched the straw. It felt dry and brittle, like the kind stuffed into old dolls. It matched what I'd seen poking out of the scarecrow's sleeves. I glanced at the field, and there it was, still standing. I squinted, thinking it might be missing some straw, but it was too far away to be sure. I remembered that weird movement in the night. I felt a knot in my stomach. My pulse was kicking harder than usual, and my hand started trembling a little. I tried to brush it off. I convinced myself maybe some wind had carried straw from the field onto my porch, but deep down I wasn't at peace with that explanation. That day I tried to ignore it. I went about my usual routine. I cleaned the living room, did some work on my computer, and listened to some music. A few times I caught myself getting up to look out the window. Each time the scarecrow was there, each time I felt this pressure in my chest. Late in the afternoon, I decided to walk out into the field to see it up close. The idea made me nervous, but I felt this need to confront whatever was making me feel uneasy. I left my back porch and headed across the grass. The weeds rose almost to my knees. The ground felt uneven with small dips and holes. My breath got heavier. The closer I got, the scarecrow was taller than I expected, maybe 7 foot tall. It had a wooden frame underneath. The arms looked like sticks stuffed into sleeves. The head was a stained cloth bag with big uneven button eyes and a stitched line for a mouth. The buttons looked scuffed, like they had been scraped against concrete. The straw poked out from the collar and the cuffs. As I walked around it, I noticed that no matter where I stood, the head seemed slightly turned toward me. It wasn't actually rotating in front of me, but it was made in such a way that I felt its eyes following me. I reached out and touched the cloth of its shirt. The material felt stiff, and the straw inside crunched under my fingertips. My heartbeat was hammering in my ears. There was a faint smell of something musty, like old hay. I didn't see any wires or electronics that could make it move, and I didn't see anything unusual on the post. I laughed at myself for a second and stepped back. "It's just a scarecrow," I said under my breath, but I still felt this grip of fear on my chest. I wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans and walked back to my house, looking over my shoulder every few steps. The scarecrow didn't move while I watched, but I still felt uneasy. Night came again, and the moon was full. Around 10 o'clock I walked through the house, turning off lights. I heard a faint rustling noise outside. My heart started beating faster. I told myself it was the wind in the trees. I waited by the back door for a minute, ears straining to catch any other noise. I could hear my own breath and feel my pulse. Then I heard a soft scrape against the porch. The sound made my hair stand on end. I grabbed a flashlight, but my hands were shaking. I switched it on and opened the door slowly. The porch was empty. The field F was quiet. There was no one there. I stepped outside and aimed the beam of light across the field. I caught the outline of the scarecrow. It looked the same as before, but I got the impression it was twisted just a little toward me, as if it had turned its torso. I tried to get a better angle with the flashlight, but it wasn't bright enough to confirm anything. The wind picked up and I felt the cold air sting my face. I went back inside and locked the door. That night I barely slept. I kept hearing small creaking sounds and noises that might have been in my head. My neck felt stiff and my shoulders were tense. Every time I closed my eyes I imagined the scarecrow's arms moving. Finally, around 3 o'clock in the morning, I must have dozed off. When I woke up it was past 9. I walked straight to the kitchen. My mouth felt dry. I looked out the window and spotted more straw on the porch. This time it looked like fresh straw. There were a few pieces scattered near the door. I felt a shiver run through me. I checked the door, still locked. Windows were locked too. It was like someone was dropping the straw on purpose. I decided to drive to my neighbor's house. I wanted some answers. I got in my truck and took the long dirt road that loops behind my property. My neighbor's yard was overgrown and the house looked dark. I knocked on the door and waited. No answer. I knocked again. Louder, nothing. I walked around the side, cued my hands against a window, and looked inside. The house was dusty and had minimal furniture. I didn't see signs of someone living there regularly. I felt my stomach twist. I turned around and left. On my way back, I kept checking my rearview mirror. I half expected to see someone behind me, but the road was empty. When I got home, I parked near my back porch and carried in some groceries. I tried to distract myself by cooking. I made a sandwich and ate it, but I felt tense with every bite. By late afternoon, I decided I couldn't just sit around. I went out onto the porch with a pair of binoculars. I focused on the scarecrow. The details of its face came into view. The buttons looked scratched and the mouth line was crooked. The arms were slumped at odd angles and the straw near the wrists looked frayed, like it was pulled or torn. I didn't see anything that explained how it could move on its own. Still, my heart thudded in my chest. I felt a little lightheaded. I gripped the rail of the porch and tried to steady my breathing. I told myself I needed to prove it was just my imagination, so I decided to mark the scarecrow. I grabbed a red bandana from a drawer, walked back out into the field and tied the bandana around its neck. My hand shook as I tied the knot. I looked into its button eyes. They looked back at me, unmoving but unsettling. I then stepped about 20 paces away, turned around and watched. Nothing happened. I felt some relief. I walked away, keeping my eyes on it, but it stayed still. I reached the edge of my yard and felt a slight sense of victory. It didn't move. It was just a scarecrow. That night I ate dinner, watched some TV and tried to relax, but around midnight I jolted awake from a light doze on the couch. I heard a soft scraping sound again. My body went rigid and I got up slowly. I grabbed the flashlight from the coffee table and walked to the window. I couldn't see anything at first. I put my ear against the glass. I heard a shuffle like dried leaves being crushed. My palms got clammy and my heart pounded. I took a deep breath and Opened the back door a crack. The air was cold and still. I stepped outside. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness. I saw the bandana on the porch. It was torn. A few long pieces of straw were stuck to it. My throat tightened. I aimed the flashlight at the field. The scarecrow was definitely missing the bandana. Its head was angled in a different position than before. It looked like it was leaning forward as if ready to topple off its post. My stomach clenched. I took a step back. I shut the door and locked it. My breathing was shallow, and I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't explain how the bandana got there. There was no wind strong enough to blow it off and over the fence, and it was torn. I dropped the flashlight on the kitchen table, went straight to my bedroom and locked the door behind me. I paced back and forth for a while, thinking about whether I should call the police. What would I even say? There's a scarecrow that keeps moving around on its own and leaving straw on my porch. I knew how ridiculous it sounded. My legs felt shaky and my head was throbbing. I tried to calm down by taking slow breaths and drinking water. I eventually slid down against the wall and sat on the floor. I must have stayed there for an hour, just listening for any sound. The house was silent except for the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I finally got into bed but kept the light on. I didn't sleep much. By morning I was exhausted. My eyes felt gritty and my muscles were sore. I forced myself to eat something, then went to the back window. The scarecrow was still there, leaning at a strange angle. I grabbed a pair of work gloves and decided I was done messing around. I marched out to the field. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my neck. The scarecrow's cloth face looked twisted. The mouth line seemed more crooked, as if it had stretched. I tried not to stare at it too long. I gripped its wooden post, pulled upward, and felt the stake loosen in the dirt. The scarecrow swayed. I yanked the stake again and felt it come free. The wind picked up and the sleeves flapped against my arms. I dragged the scarecrow across the field. The grass brushed against my legs and I could hear my own breathing, heavy and labored. I wrestled the thing to the edge of my property. I found a spot where I keep old junk, behind a shed. I propped it against the shed, planning to drive it to the dump later. The button eyes seemed to glare at me from the dusty cloth. I stepped back and took a moment to catch my breath. My hands were shaking and sweat trickled down my temples. I walked away, not looking back, until I reached my porch. From there I could still see the top of the scarecrow's head behind the shed. It gave me a sense of relief that it was no longer in the field. Maybe now I could stop feeling like I was being watched. I spent the rest of the day inside trying to relax. By evening I felt more at ease. I watched some TV, made dinner, and went to bed around 11 o'clock that night. The wind picked up and I heard it whistling around the corners of the house. I thought about the scarecrow behind the shed and my stomach got tight again. I told myself it couldn't move on its own. It had to be someone messing with me, maybe a trespasser. I tried to sleep, but every time a branch tapped a window I jolted awake. Around 2 in the morning I heard a sharp thud outside. It sounded like something fell against the wall of the house. My heart raced. I got out of bed and grabbed the flashlight. My hand was trembling. I walked to the back door. I flipped on the porch light and peered through the glass. Nothing there. The yard was dark except for a small glow from the porch light. I opened the door, stepping out carefully. The wind was cold and made the hair on my arm stand up. I walked around to the side of the house, shining the flashlight along the ground. I saw fresh straw near the wall. The pieces were scattered in a small trail that led around to the back. I followed them. My nerves were on edge and my breathing was shallow. When I reached the shed, the scarecrow was gone. I swung the flashlight beam around, scanning the area. I saw drag marks in the dirt. Something had been pulled away, leaving a path of crushed grass and scattered straw. My throat felt dry and I rubbed my hand over my face. I followed the trail a few feet, but it was too dark to see how far it went. I felt exposed out there. My heart pounded in my ears. I backed away, practically jogging toward my house. My mind raced. I didn't want to stay outside. Once inside, I locked every door and window. I turned off the lights and sat near the window with the flashlight off, trying to see if anything moved outside. I sat there for hours, eyes darting around the yard looking for any shape that didn't belong. The wind rattled some branches and I flinched at every noise. My legs cramped from crouching by the window. My mind was filled with the image of those button eyes, that torn bandana, and the scarecrow's twisted posture. I stayed awake until the sun came up. Then I finally exhaled a long shaky breath in the daylight. Everything looked calmer, but I knew the scarecrow was gone. I'm sure I'll find it again somewhere. I don't expect. I'm not sure how much longer I can take this. I keep telling myself it's just a prank or that my mind is playing tricks on me, but deep down I can't help feeling like that thing is still watching me, waiting for the next time I drop my guard. And every time I find more straw on the porch, I feel my chest tighten and the sweat break out on my forehead. I haven't called the police yet because I can't imagine what I'd say. I feel trapped in my own house. I don't know how to make it stop. I just know I can't ignore it anymore. It's there somewhere and I feel like it's getting closer inch by inch. Every night I found the radio by accident when I was cleaning out my parents' attic. It was shoved behind a broken lamp and a stack of dusty boxes. My father never mentioned it to me and I never saw it during my childhood. It had a sturdy wooden frame, big round knobs, and some kind of old-fashioned tuning dial on the front. It looked older than anything else up there. I felt a strong urge to take it home, even though it smelled like mildew and had layers of grime on it. Its surface felt rough under my fingertips and I could see small scratches in the wood. The speaker cloth was frayed along the edges. Something about it made me feel uneasy, but I carried it to my car anyway, coughing from the dust that flew around as I moved it. When I got the radio back to my apartment, I set it on a small table next to the couch. I wiped it down with a damp cloth, but the dust clung to the edges of the knobs. I noticed the tubes inside through the slattered back cover. I recognized them from an old electronics guide I read years ago. They were big and had that faint orange glow when powered on, or at least that's what I remembered from seeing something similar in a museum once. I ran my hand over the top and felt a slight stickiness, probably from old varnish that had broken down. I shrugged and decided to plug it in. The moment I turned the power knob, a low hum filled the room. It wasn't just a normal static noise, it felt deeper, like a drone vibrating through the floor. I heard crackling and a few faint whispers, but I assumed it was just random radio interference. I tried turning the dial to see if I could catch a signal. The pointer moved under the glass, but the sound remained the same, that deep hum, bursts of static and occasional voices that I couldn't make out. My stomach tightened a bit, but I kept trying. After a few minutes I got frustrated and shut it off. The hum went away immediately, leaving a tense silence in the room. I stared at the radio, feeling a twinge of discomfort. I remember thinking, why do I care so much about an old broken radio? But I found myself staring for a while, like I was waiting for it to do something else. I left it alone for the rest of the day. That night I was in bed tossing and turning. The air felt stale and I couldn't settle into a deep sleep. Around 2 In the morning I heard a faint hiss from the living room. I sat up feeling my heart pounding. I listened carefully and it sounded like static. I got out of bed and walked toward the living room. My mind kept jumping between thoughts. Maybe I left it on, maybe there was a short circuit, maybe I was just imagining it. But as soon as I stepped around the corner, I saw the radio's dial light glowing a dim yellow. It was on. I was sure I had turned it off. My throat went dry and I felt a burst of adrenaline in my chest. I approached it slowly. The static grew louder. I reached for the knob to turn it off, but the static cut out, replaced by a deep, distorted voice that spoke my name. It said my name once, then I heard a popping sound like a bad connection, and the static came back. My hand shook. I grabbed the knob and twisted it, switching the radio off. The hum cut out and the dial light faded. I stood there for a few seconds, my breathing shallow, trying to process what happened. I told myself it could have been a random broadcast that sounded like my name. Maybe a trick of the audio, but it felt personal. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep well. My muscles were tense and I kept hearing that voice in my head. Over the next few days I thought about throwing the radio out. I lifted it off the table once and put it on the floor near the front door. I told myself I would haul it to the dumpster, but I never did. Something held me back. Every time I walked by it, I felt a pull, like I needed to keep it. It wasn't logical, it was more like a physical pressure in my chest urging me to keep the thing in my apartment. I moved it back to the table and sat down in front of it, staring at the wooden case. The edges were chipped and the speaker grill looked like it might crumble if I poked it too hard. I ran my thumb over the volume knob, feeling the grooves. It felt cold to the touch, even though the apartment was warm that day. That evening I decided to turn it on again just to see what would happen. The static roared out as soon as I powered it up. The room felt heavier and I noticed my own reflection in the radio's glass dial. I adjusted the tuning knob, but I got the same static. Then I heard the faint whisper again. It sounded like more than one person speaking. The words were impossible to make out. I leaned in, trying to catch something recognizable. The voices faded in and out. My neck stiffened and I felt goosebumps spreading across my arms. Then a singular word rose out of the noise. It was my name again, spoken slowly and clearly. I jerked back, nearly knocking the table over. My heart thumped and I could feel my pulse in my temples. I turned it off, rubbed my face and tried to calm down. I told myself to get rid of it right then. I even opened my front door and put one foot outside, but I just stood there, gripping the radio in my hands. My shoulders felt tight and my fingers wouldn't let go of the cabinet. I stayed like that for a minute or two, staring at the hallway outside my apartment. I finally set the radio back on the table. I shut the door and locked it, feeling foolish and relieved at the same time. I sat on my couch, resting my elbows on my knees. My breathing was shallow. I kept looking at the radio out of the corner of my eye, expecting it to switch on by itself. It stayed off, but I felt like it was watching me. That night around 3 in the morning I woke up in a cold sweat. My sheets were damp. The radio was on again. I heard that low hum and a distorted crackle. I forced myself out of bed and walked to the living room. My legs felt weak and my hands were clammy. The radio's dial glowed softly. It lit up the dark room with a dull light that flickered every few seconds. The static seemed to come from far away, like it was bouncing off distant walls. My name came through the speaker again, but this time it was drawn out, like someone was calling me. I stood there staring at the radio and I spoke to it. I said, "Who's there?" My voice was unsteady. My throat felt raw. I got nothing except more static. Then the static popped and the Voice said, "Listen." My hair stood on end. I reached for the power knob, but it crackled before I touched it. The voice cut in again. "Stay." My heart felt like it might jump out of my chest. I turned the radio off and the room fell silent. I couldn't sleep after that. I sat on the couch with a glass of water, watching the shadows on the walls. The minutes passed slowly. I kept waiting to hear the click of the radio turning itself on, but it stayed silent for the rest of the night. At dawn, I dozed off for about half an hour, then snapped awake, my muscles sore from tension. I decided to leave the apartment for a while. I took a shower, got dressed, and walked around my neighborhood. My legs felt shaky. The morning air was cool and I felt a slight chill on my face. I didn't think about the radio for a few minutes, but then it crept back into my mind. I couldn't ignore it. That pull came back, like I needed to return to my apartment and check on it. When I walked in, the radio looked the same as before, silent and unassuming. I stepped closer and noticed that the dial had changed positions. I was sure I left it turned all the way to the left, but it was somewhere in the middle now. I ran my fingers across the surface, feeling the dust. I rubbed my temples, fighting a headache. I remember whispering to myself, "This is insane." I sat down on the floor, resting my back against the couch. I stared at the radio for a long time, wondering if I was losing my mind. The smell of old wood and electronics was thick in the room. My mouth felt dry and my stomach churned as after a while I picked up the radio and carried it to my bedroom closet. I shoved some old clothes aside and placed it on the floor in the corner. I grabbed a blanket and covered it, then I closed the closet door. I figured if I couldn't see it, maybe I'd feel less anxious. I spent the rest of the day trying to distract myself. I watched some mindless TV, paced around the apartment, and kept telling myself the radio was just an object. But as evening came, I felt a growing tension in my gut. Every time I heard a slight creak or pop from the apartment walls, I jumped, imagining the radio turning on around midnight. I heard a muffled hiss from the bedroom. I froze, my teeth clenched. I told myself it was the pipes or the wind outside, but then I heard my name again, this time muted by the closet door. My heart pounded so hard it made my chest ache. I got up, turned on every light in the apartment, and walked toward the bedroom. My hand shook as I reached for the closet knob. I opened the door slowly. The radio's dial glowed underneath the blanket, casting a weird shape on the floor. The static was louder now that the door was open, and I heard more of those whispers. I stood there, feeling sweat roll down my temples. The voice broke through the static and said, "Don't turn away." I flipped the blanket off and saw the tubes inside the radio glowing bright orange. The speaker crackled and I heard breathing sounds like someone was on the side. I reached down and pulled the plug from the wall. The dial light went off and the static died. I bundled the cord around the back of the radio and kept holding it. Standing in the closet, my hand shook and I felt the corners of the wooden box digging into my palms. The room felt cold and I heard my own breathing echo in my ears. I carried the radio back to the living room and set it on the table again, not sure why my mind was in chaos, but I followed that compulsion. I turned on a lamp so I wouldn't be in the dark. I stared at the radio for at least an hour. It stayed off. There was no dial light, no static, no voice. Eventually I stretched out on the couch, too wound up to sleep but too exhausted to stand. My mind drifted in and out of anxious thoughts. Every time my eyes started to close, I jerked awake at the smallest sound. By morning my entire body felt sore, like I'd been in a fight. I forced myself to eat a small breakfast. I didn't taste much, but it helped settle my stomach. Then I paced around, deciding what to do with the radio. Every time I resolved to throw it out, I felt that pressure again, like I wasn't allowed to. I clenched my fists and tried to resist. I grabbed the radio, opened my front door and stepped into the hallway. My heart raced and my breath hitched. I felt a weight in my chest and my arms felt weak. I took one step, then another. My foot hovered in the air and I couldn't go any further. My head pounded and I felt dizzy. I turned around and hurried back inside, placing the radio down gently on the table. My vision blurred for a second and I leaned on the couch to steady myself. The feeling eased as soon as I put the radio back in its spot. I stayed home for the rest of the day, avoiding phone calls and emails. I couldn't focus on anything except the radio. It stayed silent, but I sensed something coming from it, like an invisible vibration. I knew I was in over my head every time the sunlight shifted in the room. I checked the radio's dial, half expecting it to move on its own. The air smelled stale and I kept the windows closed, afraid of hearing odd noises from outside. My body felt tense and my jaw hurt from clenching my teeth. I walked past the radio 100 times, always glancing at the knobs, expecting them to turn by themselves. When night fell, I sat on the couch with the lights on, staring at the radio. Around midnight, I felt a tingling in my arms and legs like pins and needles. I told myself to ignore it, but then the radio clicked. It was soft but distinct, like a switch being flipped. The dial light glowed again. Static seeped into the room. My name came through. Broken and garbled, my mouth went dry. I forced myself to speak. My voice sounded shaky. I said, "What do you want?" The static fizzed and popped. The voice said, "Listen." I leaned forward, my whole body trembling. I smelled something hot, like dust on a heating element. The radio crackled again. The voice spoke 2 short words, "Stay here." Then the hum grew louder and the dial flickered. My throat tightened. I felt trapped, yet I didn't move away. I stayed there, glued to the couch, staring at the radio until the voice stopped. The dial light went out and I was left in silence again. Right now I'm sitting in the same spot, typing out this account. The radio is on the table in front of me. It's off, but I keep looking at it. My hands are still shaking. I can't explain what's happening, and I feel like I'm stuck with it. Every time I even think about getting rid of it, my body seizes up and I can't follow through. I can only wait for whatever comes next. I can't bring myself to toss it. I can't pretend it's not there, and every moment I wonder if it's about to speak to me again, calling my name in that deep, distorted voice, demanding that I listen. It's quiet for now, but I know it won't stay quiet for long. I'm not sure how much longer I can do this, but I can't make myself let go. So I sit here waiting, watching and bracing myself for the next time it calls me. I walked into that thrift shop on a Monday afternoon just looking for cheap furniture. I saw a table near the back, checked the price and realized I couldn't afford even that. My eyes wandered over shelves of old tools, mismatched glassware and dusty books. Then I noticed a display case to the left of the register. The glass was scratched and inside on a small velvet pad was a ring with a dull grey stone. It didn't look like real silver or any fancy metal. The stone looked cloudy and cold. There was something about it I couldn't ignore. It drew me in, almost like my eyes couldn't stop following that thin band and that strange lifeless gem. I asked the guy behind the counter if I could see it. He stared at me, then shrugged. He took out a ring of keys, opened the case and handed me the ring right away. I felt this odd chill run through my fingers like touching ice. For a second I tried to ignore it. I asked him if he knew where it came from. He said he didn't remember much, only that someone had dropped it off a long time ago and nobody had ever come back for it. He said plenty of people had looked at it, but nobody bought it. He grinned and told me that maybe it was waiting for me. I frowned at his choice of words, but I laughed it off. I still felt a tug, like the ring was calling me. It was cheap, so I decided to buy it that night. I tossed it on my bedside table and climbed into bed. I tried to read a bit, but my eyes kept drifting over to the room lights were dim and I thought I saw a faint shimmer around the stone. I rubbed my eyes. It was probably the reflection from the bedside lamp. I turned the light off and I swear the ring had a slight glow. It wasn't bright like a flashlight or a phone screen. It was a soft, ghostly kind of sheen. I switched the light on again. The glow faded. My heart was pounding faster than usual, but I told myself it was just a trick of the eyes. I managed to fall asleep after a while. Over the next few days, nothing special happened during daylight hours. I kept the ring in my pocket, fiddling with it whenever I felt bored or anxious. The metal felt a little cold sometimes, even if my hand was warm. I didn't think too much about it. Maybe it was just my imagination or the cheap material used to make it, but each night when I was at home and the lights were low, I noticed that soft glow again. It didn't make sense. There was no luminous paint on it and there was no battery or anything like that. It felt wrong. I started feeling like someone was in the room with me. Whenever I turned off the lights, I'd be lying in bed staring at the ring on my nightstand, and I'd get that tingling on my neck like a presence hovered by the door or in the corner. I'd hold my breath and listen, but all I heard was my own heart thawing. A couple of times I called out, "Who's there?" and felt silly afterward because no one answered, yet my gut told me I wasn't alone. One night I heard a soft knock on my bedroom door around midnight. It was slow and deliberate. I shot up and said hello. No answer. I got up, turned on the lights, checked the hallway. It was empty. All the other doors were closed. I stood there feeling my legs shake, feeling my mouth go dry. Then I noticed the ring glowing stronger than before. My chest tightened. I decided to put the ring in a drawer. The knocks persisted. Sometimes I heard them on the front door. Other nights it was the bedroom door again, always the same slow, quiet tapping. I'd freeze for a second, hard hammering, then rush to check. No one was ever there. The ring would be pulsing with that glow like a small heartbeat. I started sweating at night. I'd have trouble breathing. My sheets would get damp from how much I was tossing around. I tried sleeping on the couch, but I heard the knocks on the living room window. Each time it came in sets of 3 taps, always slow, always spaced out in a way that left my nerves rattling. One night I decided to test something. I placed the ring in a metal box that my grandfather had given me years ago. Then I put that box in a closet in the hallway. I turned off every light in my apartment, took a deep breath and waited for about 20 minutes. I didn't hear anything, so I started to relax. I thought maybe I'd found a way to contain whatever was causing this. Then from behind me I heard the same 3 knocks on the wall. This time they sounded sharper. I turned around, flicked on the hallway light, and stared at the wall. I put my ear to it. I heard nothing, but my skin was cold and my hand shook. I went to the closet and opened the box. The ring was glowing so much that I could see it through the metal cracks. It lit up the inside of the box enough for me to notice the corner of an old photograph I had in there. My stomach tightened. I realized I couldn't just ignore this. I tried to calm myself with basic logic. Maybe the ring had some phosphorescent properties. Maybe I was hearing noises from the neighbor or the pipes. But late at night, when your heart is pounding and your senses are on edge, logic doesn't suit you much. I needed to figure out if I was losing my mind. I tried leaving the ring at a friend's place one afternoon. I told him I found it at a thrift shop and just wanted to see if I could borrow some space in his drawer. I came up with a lame excuse about not wanting to lose it in my messy apartment. He said sure. That night I actually slept better for a few hours. No knocks, no sense of being watched. Around 3 a.m. I woke up to a thump in the hallway. I got up, turned on every light, and saw nothing. When I crawled back into bed, I felt that old sensation again, like eyes on me. I tossed and turned, trying to shut my mind down, telling myself the ring was gone. But in the morning, my friend texted me saying the ring had a weird glow the whole night. He also said he heard knocks on his door but found no one there. I felt a chill reading his message. I realized this thing might not care about distance. I brought the ring back home because I didn't want him dealing with it. The next few days I considered throwing it away, but each time I picked it up and walked toward the trash chute, my hand tightened around it. I'd stand there, my heart racing, and I couldn't drop it. It felt like my entire body resisted the idea. One time I actually set it on the edge of the chute, ready to flick it in, and my vision blurred for a second. I stumbled back, feeling dizzy. My ears rang. I felt the ring was somehow gripping me, even though it wasn't on my finger. After that, I stopped trying to throw it away. I started wearing it again just to keep it somewhere I could see it. I don't know why that made me feel safer, but it did. My apartment felt like it was getting darker each night. My overhead lights seemed dimmer. The corners of the rooms looked like they were filled with shadows. I'd sit on my couch, ring on my finger, scanning the walls. Every creak of the floor made my heart jump. I found myself turning on every lamp in the place. After sunset, I even bought a new lamp for the hallway. Still, when I walked from room to room, I felt that presence trailing behind me. My neck muscles were always tight, my shoulders HDHD from tension. At times I realized I was holding my breath without noticing. The gentle tapping at the doors escalated to tapping on the walls, windows, and even the floor near my bed. It never happened when the lights were bright. It only happened in dim or dark areas, so I started avoiding shadows. That's tough to do in an apartment at night. I placed night lights in the living room, the bathroom, and the bedroom. I even left the TV on sometimes, but eventually I had to turn things off to sleep, and when I did, I heard the knocks again. My mind ran through every possible explanation. It must be neighbors, it must be plumbing, but the pattern of the knock stayed the same, always three. There was a rhythm that felt too intentional. My body kept reacting in ways I'd never experienced. My stomach cramped, my throat felt dry, my breathing got shallow and quick. One night I sprinted to the door, whipped it open. The moment I heard the tapping, the hallway was empty. I still felt the sensation of eyes on me, like something was right behind me, close to my neck. I jumped and spun around. Nothing was there, but my skin prickled. I could feel the hair on my arms stand up. I tried to focus on the ring itself. I looked at it under strong light. The stone didn't look special, just gray with some dull flexes like old quartz. Nothing glowed when I held it to a lamp, but the second I walked into a darker area, a faint light started to pulse from within. I wondered if maybe there was some kind of battery or gadget hidden, but it felt solid when I tapped it. I put my ear against it. No hum or mechanical sound, it was just stone, but at night it felt alive. I started having trouble sleeping more than a couple of hours. I'd jerk awake at the slightest sound. My body felt exhausted all day. My eyes looked sunken when I checked the mirror in the morning. I drank more coffee than usual. I tried to stay busy at work, but I'd catch myself rubbing the ring, twisting it around my finger. My co-workers asked if I was okay. I just said I hadn't been sleeping well. They told me to see a doctor. I nodded and mumbled an excuse. I didn't want to tell them about knocks in the dark and a glowing ring. They'd think I was unstable. I began to test how the ring behaved in different lighting. I'd closed the blinds in the living room, leaving only a sliver of sunlight, and watched the ring. It glowed just a bit. It didn't stay consistent. It would fade in and out like a calm breath. Then late at night, under a cheap lamp, the glow became stronger, more noticeable. It seemed to react when I felt scared. If I got up to check on a noise, my heart racing, the glow brightened, that pattern messed with my head. I started to wonder if it was feeding off my fear or my adrenaline, but whenever I caught myself going down that line of thought, I shut it down. I was just a guy in a small apartment dealing with weird phenomena. I didn't want to think about anything supernatural. One evening I decided to record audio on my phone while I slept. I set the phone on the nightstand, hit record, and turned off the light. I lay there for what felt like forever, staring at the ceiling. My heart pounded every time I heard the wind against the wind or a car outside. Finally I drifted off. The next morning I listened to the recording for a while. It was just my breathing. Then around 2 a.m. I heard those 3 knocks. They were definitely close by. After that there was a soft scraping sound like nails against the door. Then I heard a faint breath or maybe a sigh. I immediately stopped listening. My skin tingled. I took a deep breath and forced myself to keep playing it. The next few minutes were silent except for my own restless breathing. Then I heard a whisper. It sounded like a single word drawn out, but I couldn't make out what it said. I felt my whole body tense up. I deleted the file. I didn't want to hear it again. At that point I started sleeping with the lights on all night. It didn't completely solve the issue, but the knocks happened less often when my apartment was fully lit. I caught myself dozing off at the office multiple times because I was getting so little restful sleep. At home my boss threatened to write me up if I didn't start showing up rested and alert. I told him I was dealing with insomnia. He suggested a sleep clinic. I just nodded. There was no way I could explain the ring and the presence that followed me around. I tried giving the ring back to the thrift shop. I walked in, found the same guy behind the counter and told him I wanted to return it. He said they didn't do returns on jewelry, especially not old random pieces. I practically begged him to take it. He asked if something was wrong with it. I couldn't form the words to explain. I just mumbled that I didn't want it anymore. He wouldn't budge. Then he gave me a strange look, almost like he knew something. He smirked and said, "Guess you're stuck with it, friend." I left feeling a pit in my stomach. I started showering with it on just so I wouldn't lose it somewhere in my apartment. I was tired of searching for it under pillows or couch cushions. Whenever like and subscribe for 4